The SCP Foundation is the most powerful organization on planet Earth. Thanks to their cooperation with all world governments as well as private organizations, front businesses, and wealthy benefactors, they have truly unlimited funds. Their ranks include the best and brightest humanity has to offer, and even some minds outside the human race. They have access to advanced and anomalous technology, from powerful weapons to memory-wiping amnestics, to state-of-the-art equipment that even Elon Musk could only dream of. And this is a good thing too, since we rely on them to contain thousands of anomalies and stay vigilant for thousands or even millions more. Everything from immortal lizards to supernatural sarkic flesh viruses to bona fide reality-warping demigods like the Deer, the Gate Guardian, and the legendary Scarlet King. And who sits at the tip of this mighty pyramid, delegating to everyone below and keeping the wheels turning on this impossibly large behemoth of a group? Of course, it's the O5 Council, a group of 13 humans with so much money and institutional power. They're the closest a non-anomalous figure can come to being a god. Also commonly known as O5 Command, the Overseers, and the Overwatch. People below level 2 clearance at the Foundation have no idea who they are, or if they even actually exist. Those at level 3 and 4 know just enough to be terrified of them, and little else. Between them, they know every single secret kept by a Foundation known for utmost confidentiality. They are the hungry spider at the center of this web of monsters, magic, backstabbing, and espionage, noticing even the tiniest of vibrations on their silk strings. Nothing about the O5 Council is simple or straightforward. Of the information out there and available about them, there's really no way to know just how much of it is intentional misinformation put out there to protect their secrets. It's said that they use complex layers of pseudonyms and body doubles. Some say that each number in the council actually represents several different people using the title. Some say there are far fewer members than 13, and these are just a series of smokescreens to avoid detection. Some even say to avoid total capture or assassination, at least one member remains in a space station orbiting the Earth at all times. Today we're going to tell you what we know. Perhaps it's true, perhaps it isn't. But as with all things regarding the O5 Council, it's certain to be fascinating either way. We're going to look at the Council's role in the Foundation, the kind of staff and the mobile task force that works around them, and some of the scattered and often contradictory theories about the identities of each of the 13 members of this exclusive Foundation cabal. We hope you have your level 5 clearance too, or we both might not make it to the end of the video. This is the SCP Foundation's O5 Council. Like a lot of secret organizations, the Foundation goes to great lengths to make sure their forbidden knowledge remains secret. That's why low-level junior researchers, guards, and janitorial staff aren't privy to where all the bodies are buried, both literally and metaphorically speaking. The Foundation has 5 levels of security clearance, and the O5 Council and their select staff are the only ones who are at security level 5, also known as Thaumiel clearance. O5 Council members are also considered Class A Foundation staff, meaning they are of critical value to the operations of the Foundation. As such, they're not permitted to interact with any anomalies for fear of corruption, alteration, or death. Though, of course, seeing as they're the most powerful people on Earth, they don't always follow their own rules on this one. In the event of an emergency, their evacuation and transportation to a designated safe zone becomes a top priority to all Foundation underlings. They rarely, if ever, interact with the majority of the Foundation, instead favoring to use a vast network of messengers and go-betweens for security purposes. Much like the US Supreme Court, being a member of the O5 Council is supposed to be a lifetime appointment, and the death and/or replacement of a member of the O5 Council is considered a truly extraordinary event. On occasion, there have been rumors of the O5 members performing power moves and killing their own colleagues to consolidate control. This type of event is thought to have been the ultimate fate of Dr. Jack Bright's father, who supposedly ascended to the position of O5 in hopes of freeing his anomalous daughter from containment. Rumor has it that he was assassinated by his fellow council members and replaced for his trouble. While the O5 Council aren't meant to interact with any anomalies, this isn't always the case in practice. It's possible that members of the O5 Council make regular use of their access to SCP-006, a small well whose water has the ability to cure disease and imbue vitality, health, and longevity in anyone who drinks it. It's believed by some that as a precaution against such potential attacks from powerful reality warpers and CK-class reality restructuring events, each member of O5 carries a small charm made from the flesh of a deceased but immensely strong reality warper. This supposedly creates a pocket of dimensional stability around them wherever they go. While it's believed that all members of O5 Council are fundamentally human, it's possible or even likely that many of them have experienced anomalous alterations during their ascent to ultimate power. They're also said to surround themselves with a number of powerful, anomalous individuals for protection, which leads us nicely to our next point. Who works directly with the notoriously private and inaccessible O5 Council? Let's take a look. First, the O5 Council's muscle, Mobile Task Force Alpha-01, appropriately nicknamed the Red Right Hand. These are the best of the best, handpicked for both skill and absolute loyalty to the Council. They work with an extra layer of secrecy and accept their orders directly from O5. If the O5 Council decides it doesn't care for you, then the red laser dot that appears on your head an hour later is attached to the rifle of a red right-hand operative. This is a group with a checkered past though. Many of their members are believed to have splintered from the group to form the Chaos Insurgency, a group in direct opposition to the Foundation. Though if you ever bring this up within earshot of a member of the O5 Council, your likelihood of going mysteriously missing shortly after is extremely high. But it takes more than just guns to keep the Foundation's mission moving forward. The figure who represents the interests of the O5 Council on the world stage is known simply as the Administrator. This mysterious, eccentric, and likely anomalous figure is the powerful mouthpiece of the Council, and it's a role that's been held by a number of people since the Foundation was first founded. The other staff assigned to the O5 Council are sometimes referred to as the Factorum, and these are some of the only people outside of the O5 Council occasionally afforded level 5 clearances. These bodyguards and personal assistants are often immensely powerful, both in the sense that they wield a great deal of institutional strength, and that they're often powerful anomalies themselves. Don't expect just anyone to get elected to these positions after all. Only the very best get to work in close proximity to the O5 Council. So this leaves us with the big question. Who exactly are the O5 Council? The short answer is that we don't know for sure, and that the information we do have about the 13 most powerful people in the world is often contradictory and strange. First, we have O5-1, often considered the most powerful of the entire Council. Many believe that O5-1 is one of the occult holdovers from the member organizations that first started the Foundation. And if that's true, O5-1 is likely to be at least 200 years old. They've been able to survive to this age thanks to magical or anomalous intervention. The race and gender of O5-1 varies between accounts. O5-2 is considered to be one of the more actively anomalous of the O5 Council members, while accounts split on whether they are male or female. Consistent elements and stories about them paint the picture of an elderly person with clues to a mysterious past, like having crucifixion scars or consistent ties to Dr. Sophia Light, a holdover from an erased timeline. O5-3 is consistently seen as male, and largely seen as being of European descent, regardless of the other details shared. He's generally considered to be extremely intelligent, as well as one of the nicer members of the Council, acting as a kind of conscience for the others. O5-4 is another figure considered to be most likely male, and the circumstances of their entrance into the Council are generally considered to be rather spectacular. Whether you believe the story that they got in by killing the previous O5-4 during a hostile takeover situation, or that they were the first to collect the entire Little Mister series from Dr. Wondertainment. O5-5 is also most likely male, and some accounts consider him to be one of the more front-facing members of the Council. He's more likely to interact with the public than others, and it's speculated that he's the one who runs the vast network of front businesses regularly used for cover by the Foundation at large. O5-6 is most likely male, and probably of European descent. His reputation is mixed though. Some speculate that he was formerly the Foundation's top field agent, while others believe he's a puppet of the Global Occult Coalition, one of the Foundation's rival organizations. To some, he's known as the Cowboy. Some believe that 05-7 is a woman of South Asian descent. She's said to be a charismatic master tactician and plays a crucial role in selecting and hiring the elite staff that work around the 05 Council. 05-8 is one of the more mysterious figures, even among the already extremely secretive 05 Council. Some speculate that they may have been assassinated, as they haven't been seen in public for quite some time, though this may just be a ruse to fool would-be backstabbers. 05-9 is another somewhat controversial figure within the Council. Some believe that 05-9 is a woman hired to join the Council directly from the public sector after a scandal. Others believe that 05-9 is merely the informal title for whomever is the acting head of the Foundation Intelligence Agency. 05-10 is widely believed to have vast combat experience of one form or another. Some refer to them as the Assassin, a female former Foundation hitman who's likely the most proficient killer alive. Others call them the Veteran or the Mad General, a former high-level member of the US military. It's speculated by some that 05-11 is a high-level politician placed by the Council on the United States Senate to maintain Foundation control over political questions and dealings. Others believe he's an 80-year-old Japanese bureaucrat with self-esteem issues. Yet another rumor states that this person is actually the Foundation's chief disinformation officer, so maybe both of these rumors are just lies meant to lead us off the track. 05-12 is believed by many to have once been Adam Bright, father of famous Foundation researcher and anomaly Dr. Jack Bright. He worked his way onto the Council to try to free his own daughter, SCP-321, from containment, and was assassinated by his fellow Council members in the process. Or 05-12 might be the accountant for the Overseer Council. Maybe one day we'll know whether 05-12 is best known for being someone who climbed the ranks of the most powerful organization in the world to save his daughter, or if he really just likes spreadsheets. Whether 05-13 ever actually existed is hotly debated. Many speculate that there were originally only 12 members, and that 13 was added as a tiebreaker in Council votes. Others say 13 was only added due to the modern occult significance of the number 13. Some believe there is no 13, and it's merely another attempt to keep everyone on their toes. Or there's a rumor that all of the members of the Council are 05-13, taking turns to act as the tie-breaking 13th vote. Whatever the case is with any of the particular members of the group, the 05 Council is one of the smallest and yet most important groups of people in the SCP Foundation universe. They're the ones behind everything, hearing every whisper and pulling every string. And if you know anything about them, even the facts you just saw in this video, it's probably only because they want you to. Calvin Lucian leads the Kill Squad team through the mud and freezing rain. In front of them looms the fortress of Baron Lehman Hoadley, the 8th Overseer. The team has already been through a lot, from breaking the Overseer Council's deal with death by eliminating 05-13, to using the Spear of the Non-Believer to kill the godlike archivist, 05-10. The hunting of Overseers has taken a toll on the Kill Squad. 05-12 almost killed Adam, and Olivia was stuck in what seemed like an endless mind game with 05-11. The first 5 Overseers were eliminated, but the words that the 9th Overseer spoke to Calvin Lucian before she died still run through his mind. Are you afraid of death? Now the Kill Squad is about to infiltrate one of the most heavily guarded facilities in the world to eliminate the 8th Overseer. Upon reaching the castle, the team is surprised to find the structure is in ruin. No one is supposed to know the location of 05-8 though. The fortress was supposed to be practically impregnable. They storm the castle of 05-8 all the same. The journal Calvin possesses that contains information about the members of the SCP Foundation's powerful 05 Council identifies him as a former industrialist named Baron Lehman Hoadley. With his vast wealth, Hoadley funded the Foundation at the start, and was considered the unofficial leader of the council in its early days, with immense control over the actions of the organization. The kill squad makes their way through the dimly lit hallways of the castle. As they turn the corner, they are surprised to find the charred remains of Baron Lehman Hoadley's bodyguards. It seems that someone or something has gotten to Hoadley before they could. The team makes their way to the main chamber and breaches the door. Laying by a still-lit fireplace is 05-8. The kill squad scans the room to make sure the killer isn't still in there with them. Adam walks over to the body and examines it. He quickly realizes that Hoadley hasn't been murdered at all. He sees that Baron Hoadley's body has been drastically modified using anomalous technology. The Overseer used his immortality to modify almost every part of his body to make himself stronger. Unfortunately for Baron Hoadley, when the Overseer's deal with death was broken by Calvin, the modifications to his body slowly tore him apart. His regular body could no longer support all of the modifications, and what once made him practically invincible became the very thing that destroyed him. The team leaves the castle and crosses 05-8 off their list. On their way out, Adam pulls Calvin aside. He has the feeling that Anthony hasn't been completely honest with the rest of the team. He had the feeling that Anthony was hiding something from them. Calvin had similar thoughts recently. He pushes Anthony for more information about his past, and Anthony reveals that he's over 100 years old. The vial of water from the Fountain of Youth that Calvin has was not the only one. Early in his career with the Insurgency, he had confiscated other vials from a Foundation site. His squad drank the water and it extended their lives. He asks Calvin on what he plans on doing with his water from the fountain. "I'm going to destroy it," Calvin tells him. Anthony agrees with this plan. Once you drink from the Fountain of Youth, you may extend your life, but a part of you dies at the same time. Vibrancy of the senses disappears, leading to a seemingly shallow life. If Anthony could go back and do it again, he never would have drank the water. Calvin receives intel from the Insurgency that the 7th Overseer is in a small town in Cambodia. The kill squad makes their way to the village and surveys the area, hoping to get a glimpse at the Overseer, who is codenamed Green. As the team conducts reconnaissance, Anthony tells them that he thinks the mission is a setup. It is too remote, and there are so many unknown variables. But Calvin is convinced that this might be their only chance to kill Green. Since Green arrived in the area, there has been non-stop chaos. She has destabilized the local governments, and now the area is in an all-out war. The team weaves through narrow passageways between houses and buildings, trying to make their way to the central compound where Green is located. Suddenly, a mob starts to form. They are getting closer and closer to the team. In a quick decision to avoid being seen, Calvin orders everyone into a nearby building. Before Anthony can follow, the mob rounds the corner. They spot Anthony, and he's forced to flee. Calvin, Olivia, and Adam watch as the mob chases after Anthony, but they have to keep moving. Calvin knows that Anthony can take care of himself, and they are too close to their goal to stop now. Calvin slowly opens the front door of the house they are hiding in and peers out. The coast looks clear, so he signals Olivia and Adam to follow him. Before they can step out into the street, a gas canister enters through a cracked doorway. The room fills with sleeping gas and the team passes out. When they are awake, they are tied up in a large room with marble vaulted ceilings. 05-7 is standing in front of Calvin. She smiles wickedly while holding a knife. She compliments Calvin on what he and his team have been able to do so far. No one believed they could pull off even a fraction of what they have. But now she has an offer for Calvin. She points towards Adam and Olivia and tells Calvin he must choose one of them to die. If he doesn't, she'll kill the leader of the rioters and plunge another part of the country into chaos. "Screw you," is Calvin's response. "Very well," utters Green. "Have it your way." She assassinates the leader being held in her compound, then turns back to Calvin. She now threatens to torture his team until Calvin makes a choice of who to kill. Green slashes Adam's cheek with her knife as Calvin screams for Green to leave his team alone and torture him instead. Green just smiles. "I'm going to enjoy killing your friends while you watch, as you have killed so many of my overseers on the council." She reaches up in the air with the knife above Adam's head. Before she can plunge the knife through his skull, a bullet passes through her hand, causing her to drop the knife. Anthony kneels on a rooftop across the courtyard, smoking sniper rifles still pointed at Green, who runs. Calvin uses the dropped knife to cut his ropes and chases after Green. He follows her to the roof where he watches as she boards a helicopter. The aircraft lifts off as Anthony fires at it from his original position, but does no serious damage. In the plaza below, the mob that has separated the team earlier becomes restless. There is complete chaos and someone fires a rocket at the fleeing helicopter. The rocket hits the tail of the aircraft, sending it crashing into the plaza full of rioters below as the crowd flees from the scene. Calvin makes his way towards the wreckage and reaches it at the same time Anthony does. Calvin looks at him, smiles, and thanks him for saving his life. Anthony smiles back, but before he can say anything, a gunshot rings out and a bullet rips through his neck. Calvin turns to see where it came from and is horrified to see the burning body of 05-7. Her skin has been charred black, but in her burnt hand she holds a gun. What's left of her lips curl back in a sinister grin as she fires again and hits Anthony in the chest. He falls to the ground. Calvin runs to him and pulls out his gun to shoot 05-7, but she is already dead. Calvin holds his dying teammate as blood pours out of his neck and chest, but Calvin can stop this. He pulls out the vial of water from the fountain. "No," winces Anthony. "I have lived long enough. Thank you, my friend. I will see you in whatever lies beyond this life." Anthony's chest rises, then falls. It does not rise again. Olivia and Adam round the corner to see Calvin holding the lifeless body of their teammate, tears flowing from his eyes. The team holds a small ceremony and burial for Anthony, but are only halfway through their mission and can't stop now. They fly back to the United States, where an undercover insurgency agent named Kowalski informs them that 05-6 is already aware they're after him. This overseer is codenamed the American because he has the power of the entire US military at his fingertips. The kill squad scouts the base where the American is located. Kowalski warns them of a crate that was recently brought to the base from Site 19. The Americans showed great interest in whatever was in the container. The group sets up a camp on a hill overlooking the base. As the sun slowly rises the next day, the kill squad is spotted by a drone and forced to hop in their jeep and try to run. They make their way down the hill, finding themselves in the valley below with no clear exit. In front of them lands a helicopter as Humvees roar into the canyon behind them. The team is surrounded. A jeep pulls up and 05-6 steps out. He introduces himself as Rufus King, member of the Overseer Council, but an American citizen first and foremost. All he really wants is to protect the country he loves. "Thanks to you, I've lost my immortality and can no longer effectively protect the United States anymore," the American says to Calvin. "But I'm willing to make a deal. Your freedom for the spear of the non-believer. Rumor has it that you have the spear in your possession, and you used it to kill the archivist. If you give me the spear, I will let you go." "No," replies Calvin. "I will never give an overseer the means to cause more destruction. The spear stays with us." "Very well," the American says with a frown. "Then I suppose my only other option is to take it from you, but not without giving you a fair chance. Run, Calvin Lucian. Run as fast as you can. I will be coming for you." The American turns and walks towards the container from Site 19, which is being lowered from a helicopter hovering above them. Calvin sprints back to the jeep with the other members of his team. As they drive away, they hear a horrible, guttural screech from whatever was inside the container. After a few moments, the army begins to pursue them. Out in front of the military force is 05-6 riding SCP-682. He is using a black whip to urge the creature forward, and they're gaining on the kill squad. Fast. A row of vehicles pulls up beside the American and SCP-682. Then something strange happens. A man appears in front of the oncoming forces led by the American. The man's skin bulges and seems to be moving from within. The skin of the man sloughs from his body. The infection that is SCP-610 erupts out of him and onto the soldiers in the nearby jeep. SCP-610 begins to infect and consume everyone around it. Suddenly, there are thousands of instances of SCP-610 coming from the mountainside, flooding into the valley. They close in and around the army and 05-6. The American begins fighting off the flesh-eating creatures from the back of SCP-682, but he becomes overwhelmed. He can no longer focus on pursuing Calvin and his team. From the back of the Jeep, Olivia pulls out her rifle. She aims and fires. The bullet hits the American in the chest. He is flung off the back of SCP-682 and engulfed in a sea of SCP-610 creatures. The kill squad continues to drive, trying to put as much distance between themselves and the SCP-610 infestation as possible. But then Calvin suddenly slams on the brake. Standing in front of them is a man in a black suit and bow tie. He introduces himself as Blackbird, the 5th Overseer. According to the journal, his actual name is Mortimer J. Denning von Krochnicker. He stands in front of the Jeep with a menacing grin. "You have been causing a lot of trouble," he says, looking at Calvin. Olivia swings her gun around. "Oh, please, my dear, that won't help you," von Krochnicker says. He pulls out a knife and stabs himself through the neck. He falls to the ground, apparently dead. There is a gust of wind, a whiff of ozone, and an identical copy and still very much alive von Krochnicker lands next to his own dead body. "See what I mean?" he says. Olivia lowers her rifle. "Come with me, I have something to show you." The Blackbird beckons. Seeing no other option, Calvin, Olivia, and Adam exit the Jeep and follow the Blackbird. As they walk, the world changes around them. The desert mountains fade away into blackness and find themselves in a near-apocalyptic London. "Oh, it's good to be home," the Blackbird says as they emerge onto a cobblestone street. "You cannot stop the Overseer's plans. However, I can give you an alternative. Let's see if any of you will take it." In front of each kill squad member appears a door. They have an uncontrollable urge to open their respective door and walk through. The Blackbird stands smiling as he watches Calvin, Olivia, and Adam enter each of their portals. Adam enters his door and looks around. He is in Portland. His parents walk into the room. In this universe, his family has been granted asylum. Adam never has to interact with any SCPs or the Foundation. He is free to live a normal life. From the kitchen comes Calvin wearing an apron. He is holding a steaming pot. Adam locks eyes with Calvin, who smiles at him. The Blackbird whispers into Adam's ear. "In this reality, both of your parents and siblings are still alive. Also, the man you love loves you back. You and Calvin could be married if you stayed here. Wouldn't that be nice?" Olivia enters her door. She is on the deck of a yacht. At the bow sits an easel with art supplies. The man that Olivia once loved walks across the deck towards her. The Blackbird looms over her. "In this reality, you didn't accidentally kill him. This could be your happily ever after. Wouldn't that be nice?" Calvin steps through his door. He is in a grassy clearing near a lake. The Blackbird hisses in Calvin's ear. "I'm giving you the opportunity to save your mother this time, Calvin. You were just a scared little boy. But in this reality, you can be brave. You can actually save your mother from her fate." "No!" Calvin screams. "This isn't real!" The Blackbird cackles. Calvin looks away from the lake and towards the tree line. Hidden in the shadows, he can just barely make out a hooded figure. Calvin walks towards it. The Blackbird follows. He is screaming at the person in the tree line. "I was only trying to help!" The hooded figure reaches out and hands Calvin a metal tube. He opens it to find a set of eyeglasses inside. Calvin puts them on and turns to look at the Blackbird. He steps back in horror. The glasses have revealed the true form of the Blackbird. He is a winged pseudo-avian monstrosity full of rage. The mysterious hooded figure directs Calvin to open the tube again. Inside is an interdimensional fishing line made by Dr. Wondertainment and a white wiffle ball bat. Calvin grabs the fishing line and wraps it around 05-5's leg. The Blackbird flies into the air trying to get away from Calvin, but Calvin wraps the other end of the fishing line around his arm. The Blackbird begins to jump from dimension to dimension trying to get rid of Calvin. They appear on the deck of SCP-455, in Site-19 where SCP-682 walks freely, in the dead world of SCP-2935. Every time they stop in a new dimension, Calvin takes the opportunity to attack the Blackbird with the bat, and it seems that he is slowly weakening the monster. They finally land at the bottom of a deep well Foundation containment site, where the dark body that is SCP-001 is contained. Standing in front of the containment field is Allison Cho, the Black Queen, whose sole mission is to destroy the Foundation. "You!" cries the Blackbird. "You are the one who has been helping Lucien!" The Black Queen nods her head. "Yes, I have been helping Calvin Lucien to eliminate you and the other overseers. The Foundation must fall.
You are nothing! You cannot stop me! I am the Black King!
Screams 05-5. Allison Chow sighs. She pushes a button on the panel next to her, shutting down the array containing the dark body. Out of the cloud of dust appears SCP-001, a massive black creature who seemed to absorb all light.
No, stop!
Shrieks the Blackbird. SCP-001 does not move, but the room begins to shake. The Blackbird continues to scream as his body folds in on itself until he is reduced to a single superheated point and then blinks out of existence. Allison Chow then reactivates the containment array, sealing 001 away once again. I will return you to your reality along with your friends, says the Black Queen. But perhaps our paths shall cross again, Calvin Lucien. There is a bright flash of light, and Calvin finds himself on a private jet sitting next to Olivia and Adam. They are all shaken, but the Blackbird is dead. 05-5 has been eliminated. The three members of the team sit silently, still pondering what might have been if they stayed in the alternate realities. Suddenly, the phone on the plane begins to ring, breaking the silence. Calvin picks it up. On the other line is the fourth overseer. He has contacted Calvin to discuss surrendering to the Insurgency. Unfortunately, things do not always go as planned. Calvin Lucien is about to make the most difficult and dangerous decision of his life. The SCP Foundation's mobile task forces are the best of the best. Their members are the elite, handpicked from the world's militaries, intelligence agencies, security contractors, and navies to create the Foundation's own security force. They ensure that the other personnel are able to do their jobs without having to worry about their own safety, whether it be during an assault on the site from the Chaos Insurgency or a containment breach from one of the countless dangerous anomalies that the Foundation contains. Of course, not every mobile task force can do everything. That's why each one is specialized. Highly trained and equipped with bleeding-edge technology and equipment, every mobile task force has one specialty, one thing they do better than anyone else in the world. And with the hundreds of mobile task forces on the Foundation's roster, that's quite a few specialties. There's the famous MTF Epsilon 11, the Nine-Tailed Foxes. Handling internal Foundation security, this military task force is made up of former Special Operations soldiers and are deployed into Foundation sites, usually when something has gone terribly wrong, to clean up the mess and restore order. Whenever a containment breach or communication blackout happens, Epsilon 11 won't be far behind. Or you can take the grizzled MTF Zeta 9, the Mole Rats. Specially trained to explore, map, contain, and if necessary, fight in enclosed subterranean spaces and anomalous topographies. Zeta 9 has a high casualty rate, but if they can't dive into the darkness to get the job done, nobody can. And who can forget the infamous MTF Omega 7 Pandora's Box? A secret task force organized in the 90s to train and utilize humanoid SCP objects in field operations for the Foundation. Some of the most famous humanoid anomalies, like SCP-076, were members of Omega 7, until it was forcibly disbanded by O5 Command, but that's a story for another day. But above all these task forces, one MTF operates on another level. The O5 Council, the group of 13 mysterious individuals that control the Foundation, retain one mobile task force for their personal use. Mobile Task Force Alpha-1, the Red Right Hand. Named for the biblical symbol of vengeance, Alpha-1 serves, appropriately, as the right hand of the Overseers, executing their edicts throughout the Foundation. Their operations are classified so intensely, one could be mistaken for thinking they don't even really exist. But Alpha-1 embody the will of the Overseers and are empowered to enforce that will by any means necessary. Most Foundation personnel will never even encounter Alpha-1 throughout their entire career, and if they do, it generally means that something has gone very, very awry. And for the few select personnel that get the opportunity to join MTF Alpha-1, they'll be put through rigorous physical, psychological, and anomalous screening before even being considered to have their identity and existence redacted from society and being pressed into service. But what exactly does MTF Alpha-1 do? How are their members selected? Today, we're going to look at the story of one such recruit to join the Foundation's most elite task force. D0912, formerly known as 1 Andrew Carter, was unceremoniously forced out of his cell one morning and grabbed around the arms by the tall, imposing armored guards of the Foundation. The test subject was then made to walk down to the halls of the site, down an elevator, through several wings until they reached a door. Then from inside, he heard a voice. "Step forward, D0912. So he stepped through the threshold of the door into the sterile white testing chamber. Aside from a single metal chair in the middle of the room under one harsh white light, it was completely empty. The shadows made it hard to see the corners of the room. Behind him, a doctor who followed him into the room with a clipboard and lab coat wrote something down while speaking in a low, monotone voice. "You will be vaccinated against an anomalous pathogen. Later, we will conduct tests of the vaccine's effectiveness. Sit in the chair." Before he even thought of running, the two guards flanked the door. Their faces were covered by black visors, and he could see his own reflection in them. Daydreaming to himself, he slowly moved toward the chair. He thought about gods and beasts and blood, how the Foundation seemed to suck up test subjects for its own purposes the way an old god sucked up sacrifices and left empty corpses behind. He heard footsteps. "Sit in the chair, D0912. He was barely sat for a few seconds when the guard stepped forward and used the leather straps to tie his hands to the arms of the chair. Then he tried to think. Why was he here? Why was he in this jumpsuit? He couldn't remember. He had a faint memory of a crime being committed, maybe murder, but who knew? Why did the Foundation care? He kept wondering about it more and more. He had no idea who was in his family or what his life had once been, just that he'd committed a crime once. But if he was guilty of something, how had the Foundation gotten its hands on him? There aren't many death row prisoners in the world, and society keeps a close eye on them to make sure justice is served. Why would the Foundation pick the most closely monitored prisoners for their sacrifices? It doesn't make sense. What made even less sense was the Foundation entrusting the job to prisoners with little education and few specialized skills. Experiments require precision and finesse, and manual labor could be handled using machines or drones for explanation. It seemed idiotic to have thugs and criminals do the work of unraveling the mysteries of the world. Just when D0912 started to wonder about how he even learned to think this while in jail, someone interrupted his reverie. "D0912, the doctor in the lab coat said. He responded from the chair, You're giving me a vaccination?" "That's right," the man said, not looking at D0912. "Good day to give somebody a vaccination, isn't it?" D0912 knew what happened to D classes on a monthly basis. He knew he wasn't being vaccinated for anything. Are you sure you can't make more use of me? Why would you throw away a tool for the greater good so easily?" D0912 asked. "I don't know what you're talking about," the man in the lab coat replied. But between the guards at the door, the restraints on the chair in the middle of the room, and the doctor's impassive face, D0912 knew he was being put to death. He wriggled his arms, pointing out that the straps were loose, but the doctor ignored him. D0912 couldn't figure out why he wasn't scared of his impending death, or why he was so nonchalant about it. Pieces of his mind seemed to be missing. His past had been ripped away from him, and his future turned in on itself. Try as he might, he couldn't remember anything about his life before his tenure in the Foundation's D-Class program. He decided that he might never have even been alive, and that's why he couldn't remember anything. Surprisingly, he also didn't hate the Foundation for killing him. The Foundation was a massive organization. It didn't hate him, it just needed him for a little while and didn't anymore. But the little people like the doctors and researchers and guards who made his life a living hell by poking and prodding and shoving and threatening him bothered him. These people were his only connection to other humans, and they were wasting his potential. D0912 started daydreaming again as the doctor in the lab coat worked. He imagined men chopping wood and carving stone to build a tower to reach the sky. Were the wood and stone being destroyed as they were stacked on one another, or were they always destined to be part of the tower? When finery and silk clothing was presented to an emperor, had the silkworms known their products would one day wind up on the most powerful man in the world? He was broken out of the reverie again by the doctor lifting up his sleeve, carrying a syringe in his other hand. The tip was long, thin, imperceptible, and impossibly sharp. Then it pricked into D0912's skin, and he began to shudder. It felt warm and hot and shook him inside and flowed up into his brain. Everything turned white, and the room seemed to disintegrate into particles around him. But he noticed a presence overhead, draped in white clothes, and sensed the two guards looking at each other, exchanging a glance and nodding. He managed to get a few words out. Stop this. Oh God. Then he fell back into his mind, navigating out of the confusing, messy, dark maze inside his head. He couldn't see the light to the path, only smoking chemical fire until he was totally lost and heard screaming and roaring. As the beasts began to roar inside his head, D0912 remembered. He remembered his name, Andrew Carter. He remembered being told by a man in the lab coat that he had a unique opportunity to redeem himself. By participating in the SCP Foundation's D-Class personnel program for 1 month, you earn your freedom. For a second, he almost agreed to it, until his mind remembered. You're lying. I'm not a criminal. No, the man said. You're not, but I wasn't lying. You need redemption. D0912 responded. I won't be told that I need redemption from people who detain, experiment on, and torture the innocent. You violated me. You made my own brain lie to itself. You had me pretend to be a criminal. The man laughed at him and pointed out the obvious. He had believed the lie. How can you say who you are when you can't even remember your own past? How does he even know his mind is his own? Why is it bad for the Foundation to mess with something Andrew Carter doesn't own? They argued for a few more minutes. Andrew insisted he was himself, and the man in the lab coat expected him to know his function, being a sacrifice for the Foundation's greater good. Then D0912 asked who the man in the lab coat was, and the lab coat suddenly dissolved away. He realized he was hallucinating again, and had been hallucinating this entire time. The man's eyes turned into bright orange lanterns, and his chest cracked and peeled and writhed. This wasn't a man. This was a beast. The beast told him that if he did not know who he was, his sacrifice would be meaningless, that he would have to realize what he was before he could be redeemed. I will not be a sacrifice, D0912 said. The beast laughed in his face, and 1,000 voices laughed right alongside it. Then the scene changed, and he was somewhere else. Some kind of dirt road with a long metal chain-link fence stretching across the horizon. Every so often there was a guard tower by the fence. He was standing in front of a gate, with the 2 guards from the room standing behind him. The electric fence's gate swung open to him, and the guards behind him spoke. The guard on the left commanded him to enter the gate, and he took a step and stopped. No, I've been here before. You made me do this, and then made me forget I did this already. The guard on the right just raised a gun to Andrew Carter's head. If you do not comply, we will shoot. Then shoot me already, D0912 said. He knew that he had been here before already countless times, and the Foundation had amnesticized him over and over and over again. But this time he remembered that his name was Andrew Carter, and they had spent too much time in the hallucination. Something was different this time around. As the echoes of a gunshot rang through the air, D0912 collapsed to the ground. He saw through the gate to the village beyond. Numbers flew through the air and wrapped themselves around the villagers. They were marching, row by row, just as he had seen them do time and time again. He remembered feeling the numbers slide into his own brain. They had formed expressions and equations that blossomed into 1 billion different right and wrong evaluations, as truth and falsehood were demoted to special cases of general chaos. He said the words then. My name is Andrew Carter. The words made a sign, and in all signs there was power. But the numbers and equations that proliferated in the air had power of their own. They formed rows and columns, and if D0912 looked at them from far enough away, there was a sign written in the pattern of the numbers. He had seen this sign again and again, and the Foundation had made his mind forget it again and again. So his mind went chasing after the sign and the source of the sign's power until he eventually found it, wrapped it up in the branches of a wild apple tree, hidden where no human eyes had wandered. The hallucination was getting more intense, and he could feel his brain falling apart with the pressure. The guards walked over and knelt down by his sides. What do you see? One of them asked. As he laid on the ground, he tried to remember what he saw, but couldn't describe it. It was like a power tool without someone holding it. It didn't know what it was or who made it, but it still knew its purpose. The other guard spoke. But if you have no marker, how do you know what your purpose is? Then something clicked in D0912's tortured brain, where he was still navigating the forest maze in his mind. All the dark, confusing paths slowly merged together at the center of the maze, and he knew that the answer to the riddle was there, in the center of his head between the beasts and the forests. It was his name, Andrew Carter. As he got closer to the answer, some things began to make more sense to his mind. There were two worlds. There was one world in which roads and buildings ran straight, and clouds drifted across the sky in set paths, and the earth rotated peacefully around a tranquil sun. There was another world where singularities and vacuums shattered the underpinnings of the universe, where fractal patterns spread out across the ground and radiated like halos from the unthinkable minds of human beings, and the roads diverged from one another in angles and spirals. It was the first world where the Foundation thought only about costs and benefits, and how to best maximize utility for 7 billion people, and where no matter what, the Foundation was the greater good. He had lived his old life in the first world, and was only now seeing the second world for what it really was. The truth. The Foundation had long since abandoned trying to describe itself to others, so there was no truth to what the Foundation was. It just was, and always would be. As he came to this conclusion, D0912 looked into himself in his hallucinatory state. He could see the chemical light substance that the doctor had injected into his bloodstream. The chemical reactions weren't what he was expecting. This chemical couldn't possibly kill him. In fact, it was a little similar to the chemical structure of the molecules of the amnestics he had been pumped with a dozen times before, but slightly different. He knew he was going to live. Outside of Andrew Carter's mind, the doctor was looking over his perfectly still body when one of the guards spoke again. "Dr. Wainwright," said the guard on the right. "Yes, sir," the doctor responded. "Leave us now," the guard said. "Yes, sir." The doctor lowered his eyes to look at the floor as he quickly shuffled out of the room. The guard on the left adjusted his visor to make direct eye contact with the guard on the right. "Hey," he said, smiling. "Look." He took out a syringe of red liquid from behind his back. The guard on the right responded. "Do not implicate me in your misdemeanors, Adam." The guard with the syringe in hand snapped back. "Don't blame me for trying to share." The guard on the right looked at him upset and said, "You are to find Site Director and return that to him immediately. Petty theft from Foundation employees who know no better is rather distasteful. Furthermore, Halmas is a level 5 controlled substance. Its unregulated distribution is punishable." "It's fine," Adam said, slipping the syringe into his pocket. "I'll let the go-between know. And he'll tell the O5s. Jesus, Bassam, do you really think I'd let the O5s lose track of some of their Halmas?" In the chair in front of them, D0912's body convulsed. A low groan escaped his frothy lips. Immediately, the two guards moved forwards and removed his restraints. "Andrew Carter," Bassam asked. Slowly, D0912 opened his eyes. You didn't kill me." "We were not planning to do so," Bassam said. D0912 continued. "You took me from the real world in order to make me into something. Direct, uncontrolled exposure to the Foundation's anomalies, repeated anesthetization, leading me to believe that I would eventually be killed. Also that my mind would be in the perfect position for the Foundation to change it with whatever is in that man's pocket." D0912 extended a finger at Adam, who offered a faint smile back. "Already knowing things that you shouldn't know, aren't you, precious?" Adam said. "You have been altered," Bassam said, "to meet the specifications of a top-secret project. Over the course of your future, you will learn more about the Foundation than any of your previous jailers ever knew or could have hoped to guess at. You will join a group that is at the very head of the Foundation. For your entire life, this has been your purpose." D0912 felt the rotting flesh of the now dead disguise that had hidden Andrew Carter fall away. Bassam continued, "Welcome to Mobile Task Force Alpha 1. So here's a statement that won't blow anyone's mind. The SCP Foundation is really weird. And we're not even talking about the actual anomalies they contain. Sure, this top-secret organization puts in the time and the effort to make sure menaces to society like the hard-to-destroy reptile, the Scarlet King, and even the horrifying bad joke tomato stay behind lock and key. But sometimes you need to hold the mirror up to yourself and see just what the heck is going on. I mean, seriously, think about it. This is an organization that uses live human beings farmed from death row as test subjects. Considering how rarely the death penalty is actually employed in the Western world these days, you know some shady strings are being pulled there. And what about the O5 Council, the leaders of humanity's last line of defense against anomalous chaos?
and according to some accounts, they're a group of vain, petty, and morally bankrupt individuals who regularly use anomalies like SCP-006, the Fountain of Youth, for their own personal benefit. And don't even get me started on the actual scientists working under the Foundation's payroll. That's when things start getting even stranger. Of course, there's Dr. Jack Bright, a man forever changed by the chance interaction with SCP-963, an anomalous medallion, and one of Abel's deadly blades. Now he's an immortal weirdo who's equal parts brilliant and a total nuisance. So much so that there's an entire dedicated list forbidding all of his zanier antics. Then there's Dr. Alto Clef. Don't even try to shake his hand given how much this ex-GOC wildcard loves using violence to solve his problems. You may draw back a stump. He specializes in reality warping anomalies, often wields a ukulele cause he's just so darn quirky. Oh, and he's very likely the baby daddy to a teenage nature sprite after a dalliance with a goddess. What about Dr. Charles Ogden Gears? Sure, he may not look that strange to the naked eye. He's a man so dull and humorous that gray is his favorite color, and he thinks sugar on cornflakes is an act of unacceptable decadence. But he's got a whole lot of strangeness under the hood. Like the fact he's such an emotionally unavailable father that his daughters across dimensions have formed a splinter cell of the Serpent's Hand, where they work under the collective pseudonym The Black Queen, just to spite him. Dr. Dan, through acts of sabotage, was personally responsible for the worst SCP-096 outbreak in Foundation history, leading to the end of thousands of lives, just so he could receive clearance to terminate the creature. And he got that clearance, on the condition that the SCP Foundation would be terminating him for his crimes as soon as the goal is achieved. And then there's... Oh my gosh. Did someone dress a dog up in scientist clothes? Oh my god, that's the cutest thing I've ever seen. Oh, this has just brightened my day. Okay, maybe I was being too harsh on the Foundation before. Whose dog is this?
Excuse me, sir, that is extremely inappropriate.
Wait, you can talk?
Of course I can talk, you dolt. I'm Professor Kain Pathos Crow, one of the SCP Foundation's finest minds in the field of advanced robotics and biochemistry. I have a level 4 clearance for 343's sake. I'm not some common bloody mutt.
Oh, my apologies, Professor Crow. I wasn't aware you were a a talking dog.
Well, yes, I imagine there's a lot you don't know about me, isn't there?
I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but that's true, Professor Crow. Our data on you and your work with the SCP Foundation is a little sparse.
Here, take these files. These should give you a good primer.
Okay, I suppose we better take this from the top then. Professor Kain Pathos Crow, among a lineup of extremely eccentric researchers, somehow manages to rise to the very top in terms of sheer strangeness. To get the most obvious fact out of the way, yes, while he was once a human, an anomalous experiment did result in him being turned into a Labrador Retriever. How did this happen, you may ask? We have the same question. Sadly, Professor Crow is incredibly reluctant to share any details about this strange and embarrassing incident. So we're just gonna have to accept it for what it is and move on. Everyone ready? Okay, good. Despite his strange appearance, Professor Crow is actually one of the more scientifically qualified of the Foundation researchers. It's no surprise that, because of this, he has a relatively close working relationship with Dr. Gears. So much so that he still refers to Gears by his early Foundation codename, Cog, a reference to both the legendary Stern Doctor's initials and a pun on his iconic surname. During one incident, Dr. Gears did tell Professor Crow to terminate an anomaly that was, for all intents and purposes, a human child, if it presented any difficulties. This sours the wholesomeness of that previous fact, so we'll swiftly move on. Once again, Dr. Gears is just terrible with kids. Like a lot of Foundation researchers, Professor Crow was personally headhunted by the SCP Foundation after his academic work in the fields of advanced robotics and biochemistry started turning heads. This was, just for clarity's sake, back before Professor Crow was turned into a Labrador. Professor Crow spends most of his time working in Bioresearch Area 12, where he studies a variety of anomalies. But his bookish nature also earned him another interesting position. He's the SCP Foundation's chief librarian, where his encyclopedic knowledge of anomalous technical literature has made him a valuable asset in archiving and organization. This balances out some of Professor Crow's indiscretions. It is important to specify that Professor Crow is genuinely a well-liked figure among his SCP Foundation coworkers. After all, who wouldn't love to work with an adorable dog in a lab coat and glasses all day? But it's also important to note that he is also somewhat mistaken-prone, with a number of these mistakes putting him in the crosshairs of his superiors. Professor Crow has come close to outright termination several times, perhaps the most out of any prominent researcher currently working at the Foundation. However, to keep himself out of the same dead man walking category that the thoroughly unpleasant Dr. Dan currently finds himself in, Professor Crow has a few aces up his sleeve. Firstly, he's got friends in the administrative department willing to pull a few strings to keep him out of harm's way. Hey, maybe they're just very ardent dog lovers up there. The other thing that's kept him from being turned into an extremely overqualified chew toy for SCP-682 is the contents of his brilliant brain. On many of the occasions where the O5 Council have considered terminating him, he's demonstrated the fact he possesses vital and often irreplaceable knowledge, saving his furry skin. A perfect example of the kinds of strange scrapes that Professor Crow gets himself into is the incident in 2009, where, without even realizing it, he somehow traveled through time and scared the living daylights out of everyone. The details are best expressed here in Professor Crow's own dictated notes. 1802-2009. In all my years working here, there have been few things which have irritated me. Caused me physical harm, yes. Caused me undue stress, yes. Caused me innumerable amount of mental distress, yes. But few things have just irritated me. Time travel is one of them. I went to bed on the 15th of January, year 2009 at 1:30 a.m. I woke up on February 18th at 9:26 a.m. of the same year. I hadn't moved, I had only 9 hours of sleep, and to me, nothing had happened. Then, after a slightly confused day amidst the many cries of, "I thought you were dead!" among other things I might add, I discovered that I have been missing for the past month and 3 days. In that time, Sophia had completely taken over my duties, though she had halted all of my personal experiments and was trying her utmost to relocate me, while keeping my disappearance from the higher-ups. Apparently,
Data expunged.
leaving me to sleep in a small self-contained bubble of
Data expunged.
and making at least
Data expunged.
which was eventually ruptured by
Data expunged.
and sending me back to this phase of space and time. Needless to say, I was slightly irritated, to say the least. 24/02/2009. They've had me in quarantine for nearly the past week, observing me and running tests to see if they can find any sort of strange abnormalities with my physiology, my behavior, my anything. If I had one more hand shoved up my nether regions, or I'm forced to look at one more bloody ink blot, I'm going to flip out and go rabid. They'll say they'll stop the quarantine soon, and Sophia says the higher-ups still haven't caught on to anything. I suppose I'm lucky in that count. Normally, the only time they quarantine something is when it's too dead to be any sort of immediate security hazard. Still, I guess I can see where they're coming from. If it were my decision, I'd probably force a quarantine too, and probably for longer. At least they had the decency to give me my clothes, my PDA, and someone to dictate to. 12/03/2009. I'm still here, and I hate it. Day in, day out, it's the same thing. Get up, eat, exercise, then simple observation until lunch, then more observation until dinner, then lights out. I'm not allowed anything other than the things I already have, and even then I only got those because Sophia felt bad for me. I'm only allowed to use them every day for an hour at most. Otherwise, they're also in observational storage. All this wasted time that I could have been doing something constructive, something useful, something interesting, but no. I'm stuck here because of a wry twist of fate, forcing me into this monotonous hell. They keep telling me I'll be let out soon. Liars. 05/05/2009. They've seen fit to release me. I almost thought I was going to die in there. Still, it almost seems strange to be out and about again. But I do appreciate being back in my own quarters, my own clothes, and my beloved walker back by my side. Sophia has taken good care of the facility while I was gone. I think I might actually leave that to her, while I keep to my experiments. She seems to enjoy it a great deal. Suits her analytical mind. All of my personal experiments are still waiting for me, with the exception of the 040 test logs. They simply haven't posted their findings yet, stating that they needed my approval first. So I'll have to pore through those the first chance I get. I'm interested in the progress she may have made. Still, there is a good deal of work to be done, and I am more than ready enough to take it on. After all, I have to make up for lost time, don't I? It's clear that life isn't easy for poor Professor Crow. Much like Dr. Bright after experiencing the mysterious event that turned him into a dog, Professor Crow is both a researcher and an anomaly. And unlike the superficially subtle presentation of Dr. Bright's anomalous nature, it's hard to hide the strangeness of a talking dog in human clothes. This bizarre interstitial zone he occupies forces the Foundation to keep him on an extremely short leash. No pun intended. Seriously, Professor, it wasn't intended, I swear. Anyway, the point is Professor Crow isn't allowed to clock off at the end of the workday like his fellow researchers do. He's forced to remain on site, almost never appearing in public. If the professor wasn't the kind of person who could easily get lost in his work, a situation like this would probably drive him insane. Speaking of, you're probably wondering by this point, other than being the cutest researcher at the Foundation, sorry, Dr. Clef, you're special in your own way, we promise. What kind of work is Professor Kain Pathos Crow actually known for around here? Professor Crow's most notable body of work is largely based on an opinion that's pretty controversial to hold around the SCP Foundation. He believes that they should be actively utilizing anomalies that aren't dangerous in order to further their collective goals. An excellent example of this is the cordial relationship he has with SCP-040, also known as Evolution's Child. She's a powerful reality warper who is able to synthesize new anomalous life from pre-existing living creatures. Professor Crow, who refers to her as Emma in his personal writings, was initially training her to do this with SCP-148, the infamous telekill alloy. However, he also filed a formal request to go further, saying, "I think it's about time we started trying to utilize 040's abilities, or at the very least allowing her to use them enough to actually learn how to control them. She will not be able to rely on the SCP-148 hairpieces forever. We theorize that as she gets older, her powers will increase exponentially, possibly to the point where her unconscious telepathy cannot be contained." He also somewhat infamously went ham with a series of experiments using SCP-158, a frightening anomalous device known as the Soul Extractor, which, contrary to its name, Professor Crow also realized could place removed souls into other objects or creatures. This led to the creation of a being that Crow dubbed Zero, because it was Subject Zero in his experiments to create a composite soul using SCP-158. He spoke of this subject, somewhat creepily, in his notes. "Zero would make an excellent candidate for my assistant. It respects and admires me for its creation much as a child would an endearing father figure. I have assured it that it would be treated well, and that I would give it a host to the best of my ability to create. All that it asks of me is that it be given a name other than Zero. A name, not a number. I told it to give itself a name, to christen itself whatever it so wishes. It told me it would have to think about it." Like a lot of strange and fascinating figures, everything you learn about Professor Kain Pathos Crow seems to raise new questions. Is Crow just a mad scientist without a cause, eager to perform bizarre experiments for their own sake? Well, not quite. The sum total of all of Professor Crow's work is Project Olympia, a topic that probably deserves a whole video in its own right. And do sound off in the comments if you'd like to hear more about the deranged Frankenstein project that Professor Crow has devoted his life to. You see, Project Olympia is Crow's baby, and also his attempt to play God. Through combining a variety of different anomalies, including all the ones we've mentioned here, and several others, he would hope to create an entirely artificial living thing that would serve the interests of the SCP Foundation. How exactly this would be beneficial to the SCP Foundation is, admittedly, a little confusing, but seeing this goal through to its conclusion has become an all-consuming obsession for Professor Crow. He's performed countless experiments with a huge catalog of anomalies under the Project Olympia umbrella. He's written reams upon reams of notes and logs on the subject, and produced a huge number of prototypes. He's also used Project Olympia as a pretense to remove even more souls using SCP-158, because that just appears to be a strange obsession of his, doesn't it? Incidentally, we aren't the only ones confused about the exact purpose and value of Project Olympia. When members of the O5 Council finally got a proper look at Professor Crow's work with the project, they released the following statement. "All activity related to Project Olympia has been discontinued. Overwatch Command has deemed it to be a gross waste of resources and permanently removed support for the project, with personnel assigned to work with it being moved to alternative sites. A hearing is to be held with the project administrators to determine how the project was able to continue as long as it did, despite the lack of any concrete results. Prototypes and other equipment have been slated to be decommissioned." Professor Crow took this news about as well as you could expect, but in the end, he always finds a way to wriggle out and continue doing whatever he wants to do. Because that's what Professor Kain Pathos Crow is all about. He's living proof that sometimes you just can't keep a good dog down.
Apocalyptic threats that somehow caught the SCP Foundation completely off guard. Foundation operatives who have gone rogue and caused bigger problems than they were trying to solve. And even monsters created or made more powerful because of major boo-boos the Foundation made. That's right, these are the SCP Foundation's greatest failures. 'Cause hey, even groups trying to save the world drop the ball sometimes. Number 10. SCP-001 When Day Breaks. In the Foundation's defense, what can you even really do when the sun decides it's just not that into you? Because that's exactly what happened during SD Locke's proposal for the legendary SCP-001. The sun itself becomes a giant anomaly, its rays going from giving life to turning any organic creatures into living blobs of slime. This all happens in an instant, with seemingly no warning at all to the personnel of the SCP Foundation. In a literal split second, the veil of normalcy that the Foundation had worked for decades to preserve was wiped out. The Foundation was forced to go public and put out the message on global TV networks, as well as the internet, that they existed and that the only way to survive the present scenario was to avoid sunlight at all costs. They adjusted to the situation admirably at first, which is really the best they could do, given that billions were turned into blobs in the first hour of the incident. But their efforts to salvage this XK-class end-of-the-world scenario ultimately fell flat. This was because the situation evolved into something even worse. The billions of melted living beings proved to still be alive, and coagulated into huge sentient blob monsters intent on inducing more people into their lifestyles. Not even what was left of Foundation infrastructure could stop that. But sometimes the worst mistakes are the kind of thing that could have been stopped, but weren't noticed until it was too late. Number 9. SCP-096 Containment Breaches. The Shy Guy, despite his name, has really put himself front and center in the Foundation's containment priorities. This monster works on a very simple principle. If you ever see a direct image of its face, whether it's a head-on glimpse, a video, or a photo, it will take the most direct path to reach you and kill you so hard that there's nothing left to bury. Thankfully, at least artistic depictions of the monster's face don't activate it, or this video would have doomed you already. And if that wasn't frightening enough, the creature is completely indestructible. Anyone who happens to see its face while it's hunting for the person who already activated its rage state will also go on its ever-expanding kill list. If you see it, the Foundation considers you lost. There's nothing they can do to save you. After finding all this out, the head researcher on the SCP-096 case, Dr. Dan, demanded all the resources he needed to terminate the creature forever. This request was denied. Not long after this, there was a truly horrific SCP-096 containment breach labeled Incident 096-1-A. Someone looking at a photo of 096 caused the creature to rampage through a town and kill thousands. How was this a Foundation mistake? Because it was an inside job. Dr. Dan had orchestrated the whole incident to try and prove the severity of the 096 case as a pretense for getting his funding. The fact that the SCP Foundation didn't notice this snake in the grass earlier caused all these deaths, and Dr. Dan was essentially put on death row as a result. But an indestructible monster causing a deadly mistake is one thing. What about a seemingly innocent little book? Number 8. SCP-1025 Handbook of Common Diseases Incident. The Handbook of Common Diseases doesn't seem like much of a big-ticket item. It's a small leather-bound volume with the title embossed on the cover, the content being a series of matter-of-fact descriptions of diseases as mild as a cold and as severe as Ebola. However, during Foundation testing, they found that it had a horrifying anomalous effect. Anyone who reads one of the disease descriptions in the book will start to manifest the symptoms of the disease. The tests on the book took place at an isolated lab, with a skeleton crew of researchers and a large number of D-Class personnel for experiments. The lead researcher found every new revelation more horrifying than the next. While the bodies of dead victims showed no symptoms of disease, while the affected individuals were alive, they might be contagious, meaning that the book might be able to cause a deadly global pandemic in the wrong hands. What resulted was a massacre, paranoia among the researchers, and an outright culling of the D-Classes. By the time the chaos died down, many people were dead. And then, the horrible truth was discovered. The real anomalous effect of the book. It didn't make people manifest the symptoms when they read the book.
It made people who looked at those who'd read the book think that the reader was manifesting the symptoms. In other words, because the Foundation didn't stop to consider this a possibility, many people died as a result of an anomalous case of hypochondria. But at least that mistake was born out of genuine ignorance. Our next, on the other hand, came from a certain Foundation personnel being greedy, short-sighted, and cruel. Number 7. SCP-1337, the Mary Talish Incident. SCP-1337 wasn't always a dangerous anomaly. Once, she was a perfect iteration of the classic Resurrection Mary urban legend. You've probably heard it already. You're driving down a quiet, lonely road at night when you see a young woman in a sweater hitchhiking. You pick her up, she tells you the address, but when you take her back, she almost seems to vanish, leaving only a sweater behind. You take the sweater back to the address that she said was her home, only to find from her parents that the girl you picked up has been dead for years. This is the ghost of Mary Talish, a woman murdered in a supernatural ritual in 1952. The Foundation keeps a roving car driving up and down the road where Mary was known to operate, taking her back home and returning her sweater. But one Foundation researcher thought this was a terrible idea. Instead of wasting money on the car, why not just murder both of Mary's parents and burn their house down? Sure, what could possibly go wrong there, right? As you've probably guessed by now, this was a terrible decision. The murder of her parents transformed Mary from a benign ghost to a vengeful spirit, a terrifying eyeless wraith who murders the people whose cars she infiltrates. The one element of this that could be considered a happy ending is that she also brutally murdered the man who ordered the killing of her parents. But other than that, this can be considered a huge L for the Foundation. But that's nothing compared to what they did in Fairyland. Number 6. SCP-4000 Taboo Incident. If there's one thing that every fan of ancient folklore knows, it's that when you're dealing with the Fae, you need to be extremely careful. And Dr. Jappers, a Foundation scientist researching SCP-4000, was not. SCP-4000 is a cursed grove where the Fae refugees of O5-1's war against the Factory are forced to live, and as part of the deal that kept them there, Foundation researchers must pass through the grove every year. But names are a powerful thing to the Fae, and they are even more powerful in SCP-4000. Part of the rules there involve never referring to something by the same name twice, and never answering to the same name twice. But Dr. Jappers found himself sucked into a conversation with a strange rabbit-like man, a member of the Fae, who engaged him in conversation, and in the course of conversation, he answered to the name Fellow Scholar twice, which allowed the rabbit man to steal the name Dr. Jappers and trap the researcher in SCP-4000 while he goes free. And he's still out there to this very day, doing who knows what. Sometimes a Foundation failure is the failure to defend themselves from an anomaly. Other times, it's their failure to give an anomaly a proper quality of life. Number 5. SCP-2241 Cameron the Crusader Incident. We'll keep this one quick because, honestly, it's a huge bummer. The Foundation discovered a 7-year-old boy from a dysfunctional family called Cameron, who had both reality warping abilities and a deep sense of justice. He wanted to be a real-life superhero. The Foundation also discovered that his powers would likely increase as he grew up, and were particularly sharp when he was in a state of emotional distress. The Foundation figured they could use a powerful and loyal reality warper on their side. So under the command of researcher Valdez, they gaslit Cameron and put him in dangerous situations to grow his powers and increase his loyalty. When the Ethics Committee caught wind of Cameron's torment, they tried to put a stop to it and bring researcher Valdez to justice. But the effort to help the boy was squashed by the O5 Council overruling it, deeming Cameron to be too valuable to the Foundation cause to be anything other than a living weapon. It's one of the biggest ethical travesties the Foundation has ever committed. And sometimes, the Foundation's drive to turn their own anomalies into walking weapons for their cause can have terrible consequences for them. Number 4. SCP-076 The Pandora's Box Incident. In some ways, Abel seems like he'd be the perfect candidate for a mobile task force operative. He's an immortal warrior, 7 feet tall, with unparalleled combat skills and the ability to generate weapons out of thin air. He's also got a lust for violence and is happy to kill anything or anyone without payment for the pure fun of it. So the Foundation decided to make lemonade out of this particularly violent lemon. and built the ironically named Mobile Task Force Pandora's Box around him. There he could put his skills and violent temperament to good use. And to begin with, it was great. Pandora's Box had the highest mission clearance of any MTF in the whole organization. At one point, they ran out of work to give him. And so he slaughtered the rest of his team and everyone around him out of sheer boredom. Who could have ever predicted that as an outcome from putting a terrifying anomalous psychopath in the field? Abel might be a walking mass casualty event, but unlike our next Foundation mistake, it at least won't cause the end of the world as we know it. Number 3. SCP-2317, Door to Another World Ritual Failure. While it may look like just an old wooden door, SCP-2317 is actually one of the most dangerous SCPs in the entire catalog. It makes Abel and SCP-096 look downright cuddly by comparison. Beyond the door is a hostile desert landscape, underneath which sits an immense and extremely powerful monster known only as the Devourer of Worlds. It's kept in place by ancient chains built by a dead culture. The only way to keep the chains intact is a series of complex rituals the Foundation performs. Except, no. Those rituals are all a placebo, and the Foundation knows this. They just do it to keep up appearances, because those chains are in the long and arduous process of breaking. And when they break, the Devourer of Worlds might do exactly what his rather frightening name implies. And why the Foundation isn't deploying its considerable resources to make this priority number 1 is as big a mystery to us as the nature of the door and the Devourer itself. If the chains ever do break, then this might end up being one of the Foundation's biggest mistakes of all. And while some Foundation mistakes come from inaction, just as many come from really, really terrible action. Number 2. SCP-2419, The Laughing Men Incident. Amnestics. They're one of the most valuable tools in the Foundation's arsenal. A special anomalous medicine that can erase and rebuild human memories, which is excellent on the whole because it means you don't just need to murder someone for seeing something they shouldn't. The weird thing is, making those amnestics is always a messed up process too. One method involves feeding people to a giant eel we call SCP-3000. Another method involved getting it from SCP-939 with many voices, a series of horrific creatures that can imitate human speech and use weaponized amnesia to lure its prey. It's a real damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. But a Foundation researcher discovered that reconstructed memories after amnestics were more likely to stick if they were happy. One way to get happy memories was to surgically remove them from the brains of dead D-Class personnel and turn them into pure liquid joy. And this helped make a lot of happy, amnesticized people. However, there was a side effect. Turns out that removing the happiness from D-Class corpses literally turned them into monsters, namely SCP-2419, the Laughing Men, a gang of sadistic and indestructible humanoid creatures with immense strength and malice. The only way to keep them contained is keeping them inside a furnace that perpetually burns them up, and they're laughing with glee at their own agony the whole time. And they only have to worry about them because the Foundation made them. But plenty of Foundation failures all come back to one thing. Number 1. The bureaucracy of the SCP Foundation. As one of the largest paranormal fighting organizations on Earth, the SCP Foundation has an insanely complicated structure. The Administrator, the O5 Council, the Ethics Committee, the Site Directors, the Senior Researchers, the International Branches, the Multiversal Agents and Allies. There are 5 different levels of classification and an almost impossible number of contacts, field agents, and front businesses. And sometimes, with a beast this large and unwieldy, it's easier for deeper mistakes to get through the net. Some site directors can have wildly different containment philosophies. Sometimes, members of the O5 Council occasionally want to use anomalies to enrich and empower themselves. So the Ethics Committee desperately tries to reel them in when they pull that kind of stuff, along with hundreds of thousands of employees spread all across the globe and beyond. And with so many people pulling in different directions, should it really surprise you that so many monstrous mistakes make it through the filter? Maybe we'd be better off with a few smaller SCP Foundations instead of one big one. When you've got a little less power, you're a lot less likely to go mad with it. And you can quote us on that.
November 26, 2014. A plot of federal land in the Midwestern United States appears to be completely uninhabited. But to those in the know, this is actually the location of Biological Research Area 12, a large SCP Foundation facility that houses and experiments on live biological entities and hazardous tissue samples. Already, it was proving to be a challenging day for the personnel stationed at Area 12, due to what seemed like a freak technical glitch. They were dealing with a system failure and a large-scale containment breach. The deadly bladed petals of SCP-143 were drifting through the air. The acidic SCP-153 roundworms were breeding. SCP-811 was running wild, and a number of amnesia-inducing SCP-939 creatures had escaped their pen. In short, it was a total disaster. Complete paranormal pandemonium. And things were about to get so much worse, as the sounds of whirring helicopter blades and the rumbling engines of heavy military vehicles approached. The embattled staff were relieved that Mobile Task Force reinforcements were arriving so quickly. After all, Area 12 was relatively isolated, and they'd only just put in a call for help. On-site security staff were being overwhelmed in the chaos of the containment breach, and they needed the big guns if they wanted to get things under control before it was too late. What they didn't know as the vehicles surrounded their facilities is that it was already far too late for most of them. Soon, heavily armed troops in protective tactical gear were storming the facility. As they entered, terrified staff members ran towards them for protection, and then stopped in their tracks. These soldiers didn't bear the insignia of the SCP Foundation, or any known mobile task force, nor did they bear the symbols of the Global Occult Coalition. This was something different altogether. Some of the Foundation personnel began to beg for assistance anyway, seeing it as an any port in the storm situation. They realized too late that this group wasn't here to save them, and met their end in a hail of bullets from the soldiers' assault rifles. When the actual Mobile Task Force finally did arrive, they witnessed a horrifying sight. Most of the on-site Foundation personnel had been shot dead, and there were no trace of the culprits. Even worse, several of the SCP-939 creatures were missing. These are the predatory pack-hunting creatures that produce amnestic chemicals to lure and disorient their prey. These anomalies are dangerous enough on their own, but in the hands of someone who really knew how to use them, these living amnestic factories could pose an extremely serious threat. The Mobile Task Force members knew what they were dealing with here. Only one group would have the nerve to perform a high-casualty heist on an SCP Foundation facility during a containment breach: the Chaos Insurgency. The Mobile Task Force reported the incident back to command and already knew what their next mission would be: track down the Insurgency splinter cell and get the 939s back. This mission would have the absolute highest stakes, and if they weren't successful, there was no limit to the damage the Chaos Insurgency could do with a creature as dangerous as SCP-939 under their control. But who exactly are the Chaos Insurgency? What do they want? And why are they stealing anomalies? The Chaos Insurgency is one of the most mysterious and clandestine of the groups that fight against the SCP Foundation. They are different from the Global Occult Coalition, a United Nations offshoot created after the Seventh Occult War, whose mission is to destroy rather than try to contain anomalies. The Serpent's Hand is on the opposite end of the spectrum. This group strives for the normalization of the anomalous, and the destruction of the webs of secrecy that keep the anomalous and consensus reality separate. Both the GOC and the Serpent's Hand have clear ideals and mission statements, but the Chaos Insurgency is less forthcoming about their beliefs and convictions. Something we know for sure about the Chaos Insurgency, though, is that they view anomalies as tools to be utilized rather than unpredictable elements to be contained, studied, or neutralized. To this end, they do whatever it takes to obtain more anomalies of their own, whether it's ruthlessly seeking out anomalies in the wild or taking them from the Foundation with coordinated strikes during moments of weakness. Though they lack the support and resources of organizations like the Foundation and the GOC, the Chaos Insurgency more than makes up for it in devotion to their cause, their unpredictability, and most of all, their willingness to use violence. It's difficult to separate the facts from the rumors when it comes to the Chaos Insurgency. Some believe that, to compensate for their rejection by the United Nations as an official group dealing with anomalous incidents, they instead receive support from certain dictatorships in the developing world. Funded by the blood money of various warlords, they carry out their research on political prisoners and captured refugees provided by their murderous allies.
They're also believed to illegally deal both weapons and intelligence, helping the dictators who fund them remain in power and subjugate their own people. The Foundation has been able to gather some intel about the Chaos Insurgency's organizational structure, which looks like a strange mirror of their own. It's led by the mysterious Delta Command, headed by a figure known only as the Engineer. Gamma-class personnel execute the orders of Delta Command using the lesser Beta-class personnel as field operators. And finally, there is Alpha-class. They're typically forced into conscription from the states occupied by the Insurgency and serve as cannon fodder for the group as they track down as many anomalies as they can. And the Insurgency is believed to possess a number of powerful anomalies already. These include the Bell of Entropy, an object that can cause a variety of destructive effects depending on where it is struck, and the Staff of Hermes, an anomalous object capable of warping the physical and chemical properties of any matter it touches. The Chaos Insurgency is only growing more powerful as they continue their pursuit of money and power with a legion of militarized anomalies. Their goal? Total world domination. Other accounts are a little more charitable to the beliefs and causes of the Chaos Insurgency. They've been described as a rebellion against the ruthless early days of the SCP Foundation, when they had a more violent, take-no-prisoners attitude. This rumor has likely been disseminated by the Chaos Insurgency themselves, though, as it paints them in the most positive and righteous light. In reality, the truth, as is often the case, is somewhere in the middle. Danger often comes from within, and the Chaos Insurgency is no exception. One constant in all interpretations of the origin of the Chaos Insurgency is that its members are rogue elements of the SCP Foundation, and it's commonly believed that they have countless moles still deep in the organization today. However, one well-kept secret among the upper echelons of the Foundation is that the creation of the Chaos Insurgency is a lot less unknown than they'd like you to think. Yes, danger really does often come from within. When researching the origins of the Chaos Insurgency, you'll likely see two dates pop up again and again, 1924 and 1948. According to the official line from the SCP Foundation, 1924 was the date of the Chaos Insurgency's defection, and 1948 marked the first series of violent raids that the Chaos Insurgency led against the Foundation. But these are only half-truths. While both dates are indeed significant in the story of the Chaos Insurgency, it's for entirely different reasons. 1924 was the date when the Chaos Insurgency, known at the time simply as the Insurgency, was created by the O5 Council. Why would the SCP Foundation's commanding authority knowingly create one of the Foundation's enemies? Well, you have to understand that at the time, the Insurgency served a very different purpose. They were intended to be a black ops group for the O5 Council, capable of doing their dirty work off the books and out of sight of the rest of the Foundation, especially its Ethics Committee, which is often in conflict with O5 Command. Their members were recruited from Mobile Task Force Alpha-1, also known as the Red Right Hand, a highly secretive MTF in the pocket of the O5. For 24 years, they did the O5's dirty work while shielding the Foundation's international reputation from any potential fallout. They were faithful soldiers, until they found themselves a new master. The Engine, a mysterious anomalous object that began to invade and infect the minds of the Insurgency. The group's human leader, the previously mentioned Engineer, is merely a puppet of the Engine, its human mouthpiece. While the full extent of the Engine's plans remains mysterious to even members of the Chaos Insurgency, the Engine has been passing down orders ever since. In 1948, the Insurgency fully defected, becoming the Chaos Insurgency, and they've been a problem for the SCP Foundation ever since. From raids to assassinations, to threats of damaging the illusion of consensus reality with their reckless behavior. And now, thanks to their acquisition of SCP-939, they could get started on Amnestics production too. Thankfully for the Foundation, they had prepared for 939's getting out into the world, and all of the creatures housed at Area 12 had been implanted with subdermal trackers. Several mobile task forces were immediately dispatched to home in on the signal, take out the insurgents, and secure the 939s once more. They tracked the signal to a warehouse in the Badlands of New Mexico, where task force members stormed in and began a tense firefight with the Chaos Insurgents, all Gamma and Beta class, of course. The Delta classes, just like O5s, are notoriously slippery.
They emerged like tactical ghosts from behind boxes and exposed pipes, advancing and firing with no regard for their own lives and safety. Slaves to the engine. It wasn't like battling your run-of-the-mill cultists. These were highly organized and dangerous combatants, with training right out of the Foundation's Mobile Task Force playbook. Several Foundation soldiers were lost in the crossfire, but ultimately they won the day, subduing the Chaos Insurgency forces and capturing the stolen 939s once more. Several of the insurgents that had been fatally wounded in battle were found to be Area 12 personnel, double agents for the Insurgency. Many of them died with smiles on their faces, knowing they were defying the Foundation to their last breath. There was no way of knowing just how many of these secretive Chaos insurgents were undercover, deep in the fabric of the Foundation's global apparatus. A nearby insurgent, slowly dying from several gunshot wounds, gave a wheezy laugh. As the task force operators approached, he ranted that the Foundation's obsession with order, lies, and secrecy is the real disease. That chaos and entropy is the fate of all things, and that to use the anomalies they find for their own gain is simply common sense. In the world the Chaos Insurgency would someday create, human beings would be the true masters of the universe, not just the perpetrators of the twisted lie we call normality. He succumbed to his injuries shortly after, and the task forces refocused their efforts on getting the 939 safely back to Area 12. What these Chaos Insurgency troops really believed is an open question. After all, the power that dictates them, the anomalous engine, is a consciousness beyond humanity. Even the engineer doesn't know the true scope of their master's grand plan. If the rest of us are lucky, and the Chaos Insurgency never reaches their mysterious goals, then neither will we. Warning. This site is for SCP personnel with O5 approval. Access beyond this point for those with standard level 4 security is prohibited, and may result in termination of Foundation employment. Unauthorized visitors who survive the memetic kill agent are detained and interrogated under truth-exacting memetic agents. Dr. Herman Wright was used to high security protocols. He had been working with the SCP Foundation for several years, and had dealt with specimens both terrifying and valuable. But something about this site was different. The security was tighter than he'd ever seen. And it all seemed a bit too much for what looked like a run-of-the-mill warehouse in Alexandria, Egypt. The street seemed normal. It was surrounded by businesses selling food and clothes, and none of the locals seemed to give a second glance. But as soon as he was approved for access and entered the warehouse, it was a very different story. He looked into the cognitohazard testing screen, designed to cause psychic damage to anyone who hadn't been inoculated by the Foundation, and entered the large bunker. Automated guns lined the walls. He could see the outlines of trapdoors below him, and he was pretty sure the whole place was rigged to blow if a large-scale assault hit. The Foundation was taking no chance with whatever they had found in Egypt. What could they be keeping locked up below? As Dr. Wright walked through the long tunnel leading to the staircase, he could see a series of rules marked on the wall. No open flames allowed within SCP-4001. No firearms or bladed weapons allowed within SCP-4001. All writing utensils brought into SCP-4001 must be approved by a majority of the O5 Council. Violating these conditions could cause a CK-class restructuring scenario, or an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. Dr. Wright's mind raced as he entered the massive antechamber and descended the staircase, but he wasn't prepared for what he saw. It was a library, the biggest library he had ever seen, with bookcases stretched as far as the eye could see. The library was far bigger than the warehouse looked from the outside, and Dr. Wright assumed it must be a disguise built on top of the much bigger, older facility that had been discovered by the Foundation. It wouldn't be the first time the Foundation found something that didn't conform to the laws of Euclidean geometry. SCP locations often played by their own rules. As Dr. Wright exited the staircase and walked up to the first bookcase, he could swear he heard rustling sounds among the shelves. Was something moving? He hadn't seen anyone walking the aisles when he descended the staircase, and he was pretty sure he was alone here, wasn't he? Making things stranger, a quick look at the bookcase didn't show any books he was familiar with. None had standard titles. In fact, they all seemed to follow a simple format. Each title a different individual person. All books looked the exact same,
Same binding, same thickness, same number of pages. Was this some sort of SCP reference library? Suddenly, a hand slapped down on Dr. Wright's shoulder and his heart nearly jumped out of his chest. He turned to see a gray-haired man in an SCP lab coat extending a hand to him.
Dr. Waylon Henricks, Chief Scientist in charge of testing at SCP-4001. You must be Dr. Wright.
He didn't give Dr. Wright a chance to respond. Dr. Henricks didn't seem like the kind of man to be very interested in what others had to say.
Yes. About time the Foundation sent me a new research assistant. I suppose you have a lot of questions?
Dr. Wright was supposed to be a researcher, not an assistant. He didn't suppose it would do any good to point that out. When Dr. Wright tried to question what it was that he'd be researching, Dr. Henricks told him that it would be easier to show than explain. With that, he motioned Dr. Wright to a nearby table, where one of the countless identical books on the shelves was waiting. He nodded at the book, prompting the younger doctor to turn it over and read the title. He couldn't believe what he saw. There on the front of the book was his name, Herman Wright. Dr. Wright looked at his colleague in confusion, and Dr. Henricks motioned for him to take a look. It was written in a language that he had never seen before, but was somehow instantly recognizable and understandable. And the book really was about him. Every detail of his life had been written down in this volume, starting with his birth, containing details that no one but he knew. His whole life story was here. From his childhood to his education to his eventual recruitment by the SCP Foundation. But the book wasn't completed. The last line that had been written described his entry into the secured confines of SCP-4001 that very day. Dr. Henricks had a mad glint in his eye.
Are you starting to understand? One for each of us. Every person who has ever lived, roughly 120 billion people since the dawn of man. Their lives all written down in these books. Every time someone is born, their book appears in this library, and their story gets written as it happens. The Foundation has been monitoring this site since the 1800s, but it's been operating much longer than that, since the dawn of recorded history.
Dr. Henricks passed Dr. Wright another book. It was simply titled The Hunter, and it chronicled the life of a prehistoric man who spent his days searching for wild game. He lived 23 violent, monotonous years before his story ended abruptly when a saber-toothed tiger decided it was interested in the same mammoth he was hunting. This must have been one of the oldest books in the library. A book for every person on Earth. Dr. Wright could only imagine what the scale of this massive library must be. Dr. Henricks explained that mapping the library was a huge challenge, before producing a map from his pocket and laying it out on the desk.
You're at base camp. This is where new births generate on the shelves along with books pertaining to the first humans. If you want to track down specific books, you'll need to know where you're going. We've established base camps around the library to mark significant eras in human history with notable books. At each camp, you'll find generators, supplies, and beacons to light your way. If you're going back far enough, you could be traveling for days or even weeks.
Dr. Wright was fascinated by this bizarre location, containing the sum total of human experience within its massively expanding walls. But there was one thing he couldn't figure out. Just why was this seemingly harmless location featuring constantly changing books the most securely guarded SCP he had ever encountered? Dr. Henricks knew he was referring to the extensive rules he must have seen as he entered. The elder doctor reached into his pocket and said,
"Let's just say that around here, the pen is mightier than the sword."
He pressed the pen into Dr. Wright's hand and flipped open the back page of his book. It was blank, the rest of his story waiting to be written.
What's something you've always wanted in your life, Dr. Wright? Think literally. Why not put it in your book or remove something you've always wanted gone?
Slowly, Dr. Wright thought back to his teenage years and recalled an injury that he suffered in a mugging that damaged his leg and left him with a limp. He nervously used the pen to scribble out the words and sentences describing the event. After a few seconds, he felt a headache and suffered from a slight nosebleed. After that, the limp and pain from the injury was gone, and he could no longer recall the event.
You see, Dr. Wright, that's the secret of SCP-4001,
Dr. Henricks said with a mad gleam in his eye.
This library doesn't just let us read the history of humanity. It lets us write it. That's why you're here, to test the limit of this power and see what this library can do for the Foundation.
Dr. Henrich soon provided Dr. Wright with footage of some of the many tests conducted in the library, and what Dr. Wright saw amazed him. The books could rewrite the laws of nature with alarming speed, as some unfortunate D-Class personnel found out. D-0546 was brought into a room with a full head of hair. The D-Class personnel was instructed to scribble "lost all hair" into his book, and he soon started scratching his head as he rapidly started shedding hair. After less than 2 minutes, the man was completely bald. D-0567, a young woman who had been brutally injured when attacked by an escaping SCP, was bedridden and would never walk again, according to all the Foundation doctors. As the D-Class personnel used a pen to scribble over the line in her book describing her injury, Dr. Wright watched as she suffered a minor nosebleed and then sat up, getting out of bed as if she had never been injured and no longer remembered being attacked. Dr. Claire Williams, a Foundation researcher sick with cancer, wrote into the book about curing her symptoms, and then addressed the camera explaining that this was her 3rd time altering her own book. Her lymphoma symptoms had returned after several months and 2 years, respectively, but it seemed that as long as she continued to make changes to her book, then she could keep the cancer at bay indefinitely. But not all the tests ended with positive results, as Dr. Wright moved on to another selection of tapes labeled mortality tests. A D-Class personnel who was given a fatal dose of drugs and then had their death erased from their book 45 minutes later miraculously returned to life, but showed significant cognitive deficits after. Another D-Class, an older woman killed in a containment breach, had her death erased from the book, but came back deeply disturbed. She survived 15 days in containment, repeating, "Send me back, let me go," over and over again before committing suicide. A D-Class personnel killed 28 days prior was brought back by writing "returned back to life" in their book, but died again just 13 minutes later from a cerebral hemorrhage. But it was the next tape that was the most disturbing. It documented a new book that was written by the Foundation, depicting the life of a fictional man down to the slightest detail. It was carefully placed in the correct position in the archives, resembling all the other books. And Dr. Wright watched the tape in amazement as the man resembling the fictional character created for the book spontaneously generated an SCP-4001. Almost immediately, the man started vomiting blood and died less than 2 minutes later. The book carefully described all the things he died from and stated that this was exactly as it was supposed to be. The fake book then disappeared into the archives, never to be seen again. The archive knew when it was being used to play with life and death, and it didn't want any part of it. The next tape wasn't a test at all. It was a video interview showing a Greek-speaking scientist speaking with an ancient-looking old man, found living in the archive slowly after its discovery by the Foundation. The man, who described himself as the Watcher of Alexandria Eternal, believed he was keeping the archive safe from the Roman Empire and the other invaders. He was unaware that thousands of years had passed since his watch began. He had been using the books to write himself another day of life, and to cure his ills ever since he began guarding the library. At the conclusion of the interview, he asked to leave, and this request was granted by the Foundation. The ancient man died of old age shortly after setting foot out of the library. While the library can't technically cure death, it does seem to have nearly limitless ability to prolong life, as long as someone is willing to stay close by and never forgets to write themselves another day. Where did this incredible power come from? An O5 authorized investigation into the origins of SCP-4001 revealed that under the archive's carpet is a concrete floor covered by a layer of ash. The ash was carbon dated to between 70 and 80,000 years old. And further analysis revealed the ash is likely to be the remains of burnt wood and paper, despite there being no known records within the archive itself about a major fire having occurred there. Dr. Wright didn't have much time to dwell on the library's great power of life, because he was suddenly shaken from his thoughts by the sound of alarms. Was the library being breached? No, it was Foundation officials, led by a man recognized as Dr. Lincoln Abrams, the very man who assigned him to this project, and he did not look happy. He explained that he knew what Dr. Waylon Henrichs had been up to, writing in books, changing the lives of subordinates in an attempt to play God. He knew about everything, of course, because he had read Dr. Henrichs' own book. He knew all of the doctor's secrets. He knew everything.
No! I'm so close, Dr. Abrams! I know I can crack the archive's rules! There's a way to conquer death here, I can feel it!
Dr. Abrams was done listening, and with a wave of his hand, Foundation security took Dr. Henricks into custody for a debriefing and likely demotion. Dr. Abrams then turned his attention to the new young researcher.
Dr. Wright, eventful first day, I gather. I'll appoint a new lead scientist shortly, but until then, don't disrupt anything. Remember, the Archive is writing our stories as we speak. It's not very happy with Dr. Henricks. Make sure your story turns out better.
And with that, Dr. Abrams and his security team departed, leaving Dr. Herman Wright alone with the endless archives of Alexandria Eternal, wondering what would be written in his own tome, as the sound of new books popping into existence filled the air with ominous rustling. Imagine if you could predict the future. Not perfectly, mind you, but with enough accuracy that brilliant enough minds, say the best and brightest of the SCP Foundation, could plausibly reverse engineer the main determinative factors that caused a certain timeline to form. Imagine if, through carefully studying these determinative factors, the Foundation could carefully shape the future into one that's more favorable for the human race than all the alternatives. The preferred option, if you will. Would this not be advantageous? Your next question is a very natural one given the circumstances. How does one predict the future in such a manner? Well, the answer is uncomplicated, but that doesn't by any means make it easy. You go there, spend a few months looking around, and then come back to report your findings. That's right, folks. We're not talking psychics and seers here. Prepare to expand your mind, and please don't worry if it all gets a little timey-wimey, because SCP-2003 is the SCP Foundation's self-made time machine. Even most of the staff at the SCP Foundation itself don't know much about SCP-2003 given the highly sensitive nature of the projects surrounding it. Much like SCP-2000 is a trump card securing our present in the case of a catastrophic XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, SCP-2003 is our prophylactic for such a thing happening in the foreseeable future. What's far more unique about SCP-2003 is that the SCP Foundation created this ace in the hole from scratch. The SCP-2003 time machine was invented over a 25-year period by reverse engineering the anomalous technology of 3 different classified anomalies and retrofitting them into our own non-anomalous framework. The massive machine is housed in Armed Site-47, a remote and well-guarded facility disguised as an oil refinery. While extensive records of SCP-2003's construction have been made by the Foundation, and it stands to reason that the machine could be reliably and successfully reproduced in a different context, even the most intelligent scientists taking part in the project couldn't explain how or why it actually operates. In the words of another mad inventor, it just works. The operating principle of SCP-2003 are relatively simple to understand. It is able to break the laws of the space-time continuum by immediately transporting anything or anyone placed in its central chamber to some point in the chronological future. The subjects transported forwards will remain in this future for several months, before instantaneously being transported back to the exact location they were standing in the future. In order to prevent some kind of unfortunate accident, like phasing back halfway through a wall and becoming unpleasant modern art, the Foundation has established a secure facility for travelers to head and wait out the rest of their time when their mission is complete. Through extensive testing, including that which was performed under the purview of Project XN Shepherd, the Foundation has discovered a great deal about the nature of time travel via SCP-2003. We'll outline the most crucial caveats here, so what happens next makes a lot more sense to you. After all, if time travel was easy, everyone would do it. First, as we alluded to earlier, the data collected by SCP-2003 on the nature of the future is often unclear, imprecise, and unreliable. For example, the data collected from 2003 did provide extremely useful in predicting and preventing a massive security breach over at Site-19 in 1997. So naturally, when it predicted a devastating series of earthquakes off the west coast of the United States in 1999, an event that several agents sent through SCP-2003 observed directly. It came as a shock to everyone when nothing happened. The Foundation discovered, following this, that all predictions needed to be contextualized through heaps of metadata for it to be of any real use in predicting or preventing our specific future. The Foundation also discovered that certain individuals had a strangely disproportionate effect on the unfolding of future events. Let's say, for example, SCP-2003 discovers that a new type of nuclear weapon will be invented in 2028 and quickly adopted by a number of leading nations by 2030. And by 2035, tensions will rise, sabers will rattle, and this nuclear weapon will be used en masse to destroy human society as we know it. Naturally, in order to prevent this, the Foundation might see to it that certain groups of nuclear scientists, certain generals, and certain world leaders get liquidated. And yet another trip into the future shows that this massive nuclear war was not averted. But why? Because it just so happens that this event was inexplicably tied to the birth of a little boy named James Hoskins in Saskatoon circa 2025. Despite little Jimmy Hoskins seemingly having nothing to do with the actual development of the technology, seeing as he's only 10 years old when the bombs start falling. The Foundation scientists working under Project XN Shepherd keep a database of all these highly determinative individuals, also known as magnifier individuals, so they can keep tabs on how they're affecting any future timelines. Speaking of future timelines, we're afraid to tell you that this penultimate caveat isn't exactly a pleasant one. There are few to any cohesive future timelines where humanity survives long term. Bummer, right? The Foundation calls these loose timelines determinative sets, and in the majority of them, human civilization collapses, all humans die, and in some cases, the Earth becomes completely uninhabitable to all forms of life. The Foundation is currently seeking a more optimistic option through controlled manipulations of the casual stream in our time. But currently, all we have is the preferred option, Option XN. And if you're someone who would jump at the chance to travel into the future and take a gander at all the wondrous or terrifying sights, there's actually one pretty major caveat of SCP-2003 that we've been playing rather close to the chest. Early Foundation tests found out that the time travel process via SCP-2003 is extremely damaging to plant and animal tissue. Rather than just going on a wacky time travel adventure like Doctor Who or Austin Powers, it'd be a little more like stepping into a giant microwave while dressed in a spacesuit made of aluminum foil. You're gonna die a horrible death. But there is one silver lining. Well, maybe not silver from your perspective, probably more like pewter. The Foundation has discovered a way to viably send human-adjacent subjects through time with SCP-2003 without instantaneous death. We just can't promise that you're going to like it. You see, the one kind of organic tissue that seems to survive the SCP-2003 time travel process is the human brain and nervous system. Due to the highly controlled nature of Project XN Shepherd, the Foundation can't just send in D-classes to do the job. They instead use actual agents, though mostly ones who are nearing or beyond retirement, or are suffering from a terminal illness. These agents are dosed on a course of anti-anxiety, antidepressant, and antipsychotic chemotherapy to toughen their minds for the horrors to come. Though the exact nature of these horrors is kept secret from them until it's already happened. You may be familiar with one of the Foundation's most well-known front companies, Boston Dynamics, as well as one of their most famous products, the robotic quadrupedal probe known as Big Dog. Well, in order to send a sentient being through time without them being completely destroyed by SCP-2003, the agent's brain and nervous system are entirely removed from their body and transported into the body of a modified Big Dog. Still think it'd be fun to time travel? Hey, don't look so nervous! For everyone who agrees to be part of an SCP-2003 mission and survives, you'll get one hell of a pension. Or at least your family will, if that's any consolation. Now that you understand all this, let's come clean about this mysterious Project XN Shepherd we've been alluding to throughout the video. It all started with a letter to the heads of the SCP-2003 research project from O5-7, a member of the legendary O5 Council that instructs the Foundation in all that it does. The letter read,
Up until this point, all attempts at future intervention using SCP-2003 have been limited in scope and scattershot in nature. I have seen the wisdom in this approach. It is informed by painstaking contingency planning and risk-benefit evaluation. The past 18 months of reports, however, have promise. If we are bold enough to seize the initiative, we may have found a way out here. The price, though, there's always a price, as you well know. Consider this note an official change in policy. As of today, all efforts at intervention are now aimed at bringing about and preserving XN. Designated magnifier individuals associated with XN are to be protected from undue interference at the expense of all other priorities. In particular, Nuru Diang must be allowed to die in the manner most observations have predicted for her. If anything at all changes in that regard, make it happen. I trust that you're familiar enough with the rest of the determinative sets to understand why we're going this way.
So, in short of all the potential timelines, 05-7 wants the researchers assigned to SCP-2003 to ensure that the timeline XN is the one that actually comes to be, seeing as it's preferable to the alternatives, hence Project XN Shepherd. You're probably wondering, what happens in Timeline XN that makes it the most desirable outcome possible? Well, things continue as normal. Everything from anomalous activity to social unrest to environmental factors stay pretty much the same as time goes on, until 2349 when a giant 22-kilometer asteroid strikes the Earth and wipes out the majority of humanity in an instant. Following this, the world becomes unfit for human habitation. Hey, don't look so glum. You'll all be dead by then. Well, except Dr. Bright. Sorry again, Jack. We at least get a nice 3 centuries before we're wiped from the cosmic table. Your next question is probably, if the preferred option has humanity being wiped out by a giant asteroid in a little over 300 years, what are all the other ones? Aren't we entitled to a multiple-choice future if we don't feel comfortable with being completely annihilated by an asteroid before we're even halfway to the year 3000? Well, we'll give you a little tasting platter of potential timelines, and you can take your pick. There was the narrowly avoided Scenario XB, where things progressed in a similar fashion to Scenario XN, except a massive gamma-ray burst from the sun in April 2017 wiped out all life on Earth within 38 seconds. Then there's Scenario XE, where the birth of an unnamed boy in Turkmenistan combined with the election of Sir William Entwistle as Prime Minister of New Zealand in 2049 leads to a world-destroying nuclear exchange between Israel and Greater Indonesia in 2058. Any attempts to stop it just make it happen sooner. Or what about Scenario XH? Here, a deadly mutated form of influenza causes the deaths of over 1 billion people worldwide. Combating this threat causes increased cooperation between world governments that actually resulted in a huge net improvement for global peace and quality of life. It seems unrealistic, we know, but SCP-2003 doesn't lie. However, despite things going well, all known life on Earth just vanishes on July 29, 2059. It's a hell of an unpleasant twist after things start going so well for once. In Scenario XO, the anomalous increases in frequency and magnitude in 2037. This leads to a broken masquerade scenario where the Foundation's web of secrecy collapses, and anomalous chaos reigns across the globe. The Foundation's members are hunted and killed, and world governments attempting to weaponize the anomalous leads to a new arms race that wipes out all of humanity by 2048. Or maybe Scenario XU is more your cup of tea. In this one, the sun collapses, leading to eternal darkness and massive temperature drops. Inexplicably, humans still survive, but are in a state of constant, unmoving agony. And maybe, if you just really love spiders, you'll get a kick out of Scenario XX, where a mysterious pathogenic protist causes the majority of humanity to fall in love with the Brazilian wandering spider, one of the few spiders that pose an actual threat to humans. The diverting of all resources meant to keep humans alive to instead breeding the spiders, combined with many people being killed by the resulting spiders, leads to 6 billion deaths in the early 2030s. But hey, you'll get to see some pretty great spiders if that's your thing, I guess. Scenario XN is hardly a picnic. Nobody likes the idea of facing an Armageddon straight out of Armageddon when that asteroid kills all life on Earth in 300 years. But while it undeniably isn't perfect, it may just be the best option we've got. Isn't the future amazing? The perfect childhood. School is out, shoes are off, you're sprinting across the hot sandy beach. smiling for no apparent reason, because back then you didn't even need one. Did I mention there's an orange cone on your head? Where did it come from? Why is it there? What is the point? Do not think too deeply about it. There is no room for symbolism in the summer. There is no use overanalyzing the antics of teenage youth. It's just a cone, and you're just a kid, doing things for no other reason than that you want to. You're busy living, doing your thing. Responsibility is still years away. Such a pretty picture we're painting, isn't it? But this is SCP Explained, so of course by now you figured out this is all a misdirection, didn't you? Well, here it comes. Watch closely. Look at you run, moving towards nothing as if it means everything. Look at that smile, the wind whipping through the gap in your teeth. Soak it in. In 20 years, your face muscles will have forgotten the movement. Look at you live. Yes, go on. Soak it in. You will be chasing this feeling your whole life, while moving further and further away from it. Oof. Depressing, isn't it? We think so too. But here is the silver lining, something you'd be wise to celebrate. At least you have this moment to look back on. The memory is with you forever. Not everyone is so lucky. Not everyone had a good childhood. Furthermore, not everyone even has a childhood at all. Some live beyond the expectations of age. Imagine a 14-year-old forced to be 40. That's not to say they have to pay taxes or can run for Senate. No, this level of forced maturity that I'm speaking of transcends the scope of average adulthood. So let's not imagine a kid going through the mundane life of a cubicle junkie, filing papers, pretending to work, and answering phone calls. Instead, let's do this. Imagine a kid going to war. Imagine a kid carrying out stealth assassination missions. Imagine a kid being locked in containment, living with little human interaction and freedom. This is all to say, imagine a kid not being a kid at all. Now this is more like an SCP Explained. This is the sad story of someone who had to say goodbye to the joys of adolescence earlier than anyone ever should have to. In fact, they didn't even get to say goodbye at all. This is the story of SCP-105. Now, to be clear, SCP-105 is not a bloodthirsty demon living in the shadows. It is not an unsquishable spider dancing across your hardwood floor, mocking the soles of your shoes as they stomp down with no success. It is not a grand piano in a hotel lobby absorbing the DNA of all who touches its keys. And it is not a freezer that tempts late-night snackers to reach deeper and deeper towards an ever-elusive hot fudge sundae, until they are sucked in frozen solid, sold for millions and displayed as decorative ice sculptures atop the center of punch bowls at parties for rich politicians. No, we'll just have to get to those later on a different day. Because SCP-105 is just, how do I put this? A girl. Yes, a small, unremarkable looking girl. At the time of acquisition, she was just 1.5 meters tall and weighed 50 kilograms. Even those of you listening with little to no instinctual senses for converting meters and kilograms to feet and pounds can still understand this is no frightful giant we're talking about. Lining up a class by height, she'd blend in somewhere toward the middle, and if you look even closer, beyond the shallow surface of measurements and toward the details of her face, even still, you won't find a single freckle to fear. SCP-105 has blue eyes and blonde hair. Nothing coastal Californians haven't seen a million times over just this Monday. Formerly known as Iris Thompson, SCP-105 has no discernible oddities. If you saw her jumping rope, you wouldn't point and stare. If you saw her at the park playing with your children, you wouldn't pull them away and squeeze them tight. If you saw her walking toward you on a sidewalk, you wouldn't turn around and run away in the other direction. By herself, SCP-105 is not too different from anyone else, no matter how close we zoom in on her appearance, personality, or her tendencies. There is nothing to see that triggers alarms. If you ask her to spit fire, she won't. If you conduct a lab experiment where she has to find the exit of a maze using only her sense of smell, she will get lost and fail. This is all to say, if you look too closely through the microscope at SCP-105, you might miss her anomalous abilities. Instead, you'd be better off taking a step back and just watching her live her life. And that is all that she wanted to do. live her life. Is that so much to ask? The first thing you will notice is that she isn't alone. And like in any good buddy-buddy film, her counterpart reveals more to her character. So who is standing by her side? Who is the co-star of this film that pushes our protagonist into the Foundation spotlight? Well, it's no person at all. It's a camera. Her camera. SCP-105-B is a Polaroid One-Step Express, manufactured in 1982. It does not appear to have any out-of-the-ordinary physical characteristics and appears to be, for all intents and purposes, a normal Polaroid camera, operating as expected for all persons aside from SCP-105. When you point it at a subject, they don't get sucked into the lens. The flash can't blind an army of soldiers. When you say cheese, it doesn't shoot out a brick of cheddar. The camera is nothing more than a camera. That is, until it's in the hands of Iris Thompson. What's more unique than the camera itself are the photographs it produces. When SCP-105 holds a photograph taken by SCP-105-B, the picture changes from a still shot to that of a real-time image of the person, location, or object photographed. Regardless of the subject of the photograph, the image will convert itself into what appears to be a handheld live stream of whatever was pictured. Imagine a photograph of a waterfall. If held by SCP-105, you do not just see the image of a waterfall, but you will physically see the water falling, splashing down onto the rocks below. It is similar to holding your cell phone and watching a GIF. However, instead of just watching, Iris is able to interact with it in a way beyond any technology has ever allowed. SCP-105 is then able to move her arm through and into the photograph and manipulate objects within reach of the original point at which the photograph was first taken. Yes, you heard me right. SCP-105-2 doesn't just offer Iris quick prints of memories, it gives her much more, granting her access to a new dimension. Although this is clearly a unique situation for Iris, it doesn't mean that Iris is the only one affected by this anomaly. When she engages with the photographs, it actually affects the world attached to them. That is to say, there are consequences to her actions. Every photograph she has ever taken is essentially a portal to a world of problems. Witnesses who have been on the other side of the photograph while SCP-105 was manipulating it reported seeing her hand reaching out from an invisible portal and carrying on whatever actions she pleases. Once her arm is inside the photograph, she has the freedom to control the image as she wishes. This ability has obvious benefits for anyone. Imagine being able to carry around with you a photograph of your oven. Then, whenever you get that paranoid feeling that you forgot to turn it off, you can reach into the Polaroid and turn the dial how you please. But the peace of mind is just a small benefit of this power, and it's easy to assume that anyone would be tempted to use their abilities for far more than just controlling at-home kitchen appliances while on vacation. The Foundation specifically concerns itself with bigger, more ambitious uses of anomalous power, and the power in this case wasn't just in the camera. While 105-B helps Iris use her powers most efficiently, she is still able to manipulate objects through photographs taken by other cameras, though not quite as well as when she's using her favorite camera. Noting that 105-B and the photographs taken by said camera have no unusual properties when used by any other person except for SCP-105, it was clear to the Foundation who the greater anomaly in the situation really was. The tool wasn't of their interest, but rather the person wielding it. But how did this all come to their attention? Is the Foundation really investigating the life of a girl playing with a camera in her bedroom? Well, some moments are just too big to be bound by privacy. SCP-105 was brought to the forefront of the Foundation's attention shortly after the murder of her boyfriend. Promptly after his death, the police investigated the scene and looked for answers. And when looking for answers, they started conjuring up questions, one of which put Iris at the center of their search. Where were you? Her response wasn't so straightforward. She wasn't there, but then she was. The police pressed further, not understanding. SCP-105 explained that she was at home, but once she learned of his death, she hurried over to him. This left the police even more suspicious, as there was no way she could have been informed of the murder by an outside source. She must have been there all along. Seeing the skepticism in their faces, SCP-105 scrambled for an explanation. She took a deep breath and got her story straight. She claimed to have been on the phone with her boyfriend at the time of the violent attack, and once she heard the commotion, it prompted her to hurry over to his location, where she saw him dead. This excuse made logical sense, and so the police dropped their suspicion. After all, Iris was just a small, innocent teenager. However, just as quickly as the police moved on from Iris, they returned to her, this time with tangible proof of their doubts. The telephone records did not correspond to her story. She was never on the phone with her boyfriend that night. It was then that SCP-105 had to confess. She informed her lawyer that she had, in fact, been there for the murder. Well, not there, but kind of there. She explained how she witnessed the murder through a photograph she had taken with her boyfriend several days prior. The attorney in question disregarded the story and recommended that the subject plead guilty. Iris, however, refused to do so. She was sticking to her truth, no matter how crazy it made her seem. She went forward and told her story in court. It was met with derision. The judge and the jury didn't even entertain the possibility of any of it being true. Iris was flustered. She was a young teenage girl fighting for her freedom, her only weapon being the truth. But the room wasn't participating in her reality. They dismissed her as crazy. And so when Iris offered to demonstrate her ability, it was the last straw. The judge wouldn't allow Iris to waste any more of anyone's time. She was sentenced to a psychiatric ward. Iris was determined to get out of there. She knew she didn't belong. Luckily, someone else knew, too, that she didn't belong. And because of this, in a matter of days, she was out of there. But home wasn't where she was heading. No, it wasn't Mom and Dad picking her up from the psychiatric ward, but rather the Foundation breaking her out, stealing her for themselves, and bringing her to Site-17. There at Site-17, Foundation personnel began their mission, which started with trying to convince SCP-105 that they were on her side. They began by retrieving SCP-105-B from SCP-105's home and replacing it with an identical model, only then to give it to her under the lie that it was the original. The lies wouldn't stop just there. They'd continue to pour over her reality until it was impossible for her to recognize one from the other. SCP-105's parents was informed that she was killed during the botched escape of another patient, while both were in the custody of a psychiatric care facility. In truth, though, the Foundation wants nothing more than to keep SCP-105 alive. However, they are not concerned about the quality of her living. Iris was a tool for the Foundation. She was an asset. She was a secret weapon. She had powers they could have only dreamed of. Only now, they existed. But before shooting their shiny new weapon, they needed to learn how to use it properly. But with what manual? How do you learn how to use another human? Well, having seen enough Marvel movies, they knew they would be better equipped with knowledge if they understood her origin story. So they began questioning Iris, trying to get to the root cause of her anomalous aptitude. She was either 10 or 11. She remembers because she was looking at a picture of the ocean, and she noticed that the waves began moving. Her parents said that she just had an overactive imagination. When she first was able to move objects in the photos, she was 11, 12 maybe. Her family took a trip to the Grand Canyon. She looked through the photo album after they got home, and she brushed her hand up against one by accident. When she did, she pushed a rock over the edge, falling into the canyon. She could actually hear it clatter on the way down. She became fascinated with photography after that. Most of the time it didn't work with photographs she took, but her parents got her a Polaroid One-Step Express camera that she'd been begging them for since Christmas. After she got the camera, the photos got easier to interact with. After hearing her story, the researchers made her an offer. She'd be allowed certain freedoms if she agreed to use her powers to do them a few favors. She could, at least in some capacity, act her age, socialize, and do things a girl her grade would normally do. But in exchange, she had to first do things that nobody any age should ever have to do. Iris agreed, and it was in this agreement that we see just how desperate she was during her childhood. She was willing to risk everything for something as small as a quick conversation with a guard, 5 minutes of jump rope, or simply a few minutes spent under the sun. She was assigned to be part of Mobile Task Force Omega-7 to carry out a wide range of missions. And if the fate of the first humanoid SCP recruited to Mobile Task Force Omega-7 was any indication how this might play out, Iris was in a lot of trouble. The Pandora's Box initiative had a history of failure. Their previous efforts under Team Able ended in the death of absolutely everyone. However, Team Iris began on a more hopeful note. They carried out different missions than Team Able. Instead of violent attacks, their primary missions were reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. However, just because there were no swords and blood drawn, the missions were not so harmless. Despite Team Iris carrying out over 20 jobs in cooperation with the Bow Commission, swiftly and without incident, their streak eventually had to come to an end. The first disciplinary incident for SCP-105 involved the escalation of Team Iris missions from reconnaissance to assassinations. Yes, this teenage girl with not a violent bone in her body was tasked to kill. Note that her only power is that of manipulating photos. In her mind, this is nothing more than a party trick. It was a gift she was born with, and she was always aware that it was unique, but never did she expect it to be a curse. She liked being able to straighten books and photographs of libraries. She liked being able to read into photos and hug her teddy bear that she no longer has. She liked being able to help, heal, and embrace history, not alter it. SCP-105 violently opposed the use of her abilities to carry out assassinations. They wanted her to murder people, and like any girl of her nature would, she resisted, but they kept pressing. While some teenage girls are pressured by parents to play sports they don't particularly care for, this one was pressured to kill. During these events, SCP-105 became emotionally distressed and attempted to deceive Foundation personnel into believing that her anomalous traits had disappeared. She claimed that she couldn't carry out the missions anymore. Her doctor submitted a report recommending that SCP-105 be reclassified as neutralized, undergo amnestic treatment, and be released to the public with regular monitoring. After further investigation, the Foundation realized the doctor was prioritizing SCP-105's emotional state over the goals of the Foundation. They had built a friendship. He was the one telling her to pretend not to have powers anymore. This was all found out. Thus, his recommendation to release Iris was denied. With nothing to lose at that point, the doctor even helped Iris try to escape the Foundation's custody. But this failed. She was captured, and the doctor was promptly discharged. At that point, Iris had to start over again to regain the trust of the Foundation. In yet another compromise, she re-demonstrated her anomalous abilities in exchange for the restoration of limited privileges. Nothing more than occasionally being allowed to jump rope, getting a lollipop every Thursday, and being informed of the recent trends on TikTok. And so this is where we know her to be, continuously making sacrifices in exchange for tiny teaspoons of teenage life. All the while she is growing older and older, unfulfilled by the years she passes. And so while it is easy to look back on our childhood with lust and longing, at least it was there, and is still there now, safely stored in our memory, stored in the protection of the past. For Iris, this is not so. Her childhood is both behind her and in front of her. It is something she moved on from too quickly, and it is a future she fights for every day. Even when she is 97, gray, decrepit, and on her deathbed, she will be sacrificing her freedoms to feel 15. And so we have to wonder, is SCP-105 a danger to anyone at all? I leave you with a question. Are we more likely to be attacked by a dog, or the master holding its leash?
On the 13th of October 1989, the town of Danner, Wisconsin was shaken by a seismic event unlike anything they'd ever experienced. This might have been written off as an earthquake, were it not for one disturbing factor. The ground-shaking event was accompanied by a huge spike of radioactivity, with the strange phenomenon happening a month before the Berlin Wall was torn down, during a period of the Cold War that historians call the Year of Crisis. It's easy to understand why the people of Danner immediately assumed the worst. But the huge eruption they felt wasn't the result of a nuclear bomb going off. The SCP Foundation was alerted to the event in Danner when they picked up a series of radio transmissions coming from just outside the town. When they arrived, they found something incredible, like something out of a sci-fi movie. Standing at the quake's epicenter was a creature that looked to be from another world. Standing 2 meters tall and weighing almost 300 kilograms, the being was green and brown in color, with a bulky humanoid body. Its head was a different story though, and resembled a gigantic housefly with a proboscis and huge stereoscopic eyes. Surprisingly, the strange creature did not immediately go on a rampage. Instead, the being, designated SCP-2273, appeared to be exhausted, injured, and extremely malnourished. It offered no resistance at all to the Foundation containment team, and it was taken to Site-17 without conflict. While the SCP Foundation is no stranger to visitors from other worlds, there was something especially unusual about this supposed alien invader. The doctors who examined the creature and treated its injuries found an appendage that seemed to function as an organic radio transmitter, and large open wounds on its shoulder blades and forearms where further appendages had been ripped off. Additionally, while its insect-like exoskeleton was mostly a uniform green and brown pattern, the creature's upper arms and torso were dotted with a variety of scars and markings that, on closer inspection, looked like military badges. Was this some kind of wounded intergalactic soldier who had been stranded on Earth? If it was, then how were the organic badges on this alien's exoskeleton a near-perfect match to military badges worn by soldiers in the Soviet Union? Even if they did reference a unit that didn't officially exist within the Soviet Army, the scientists were sure this alien wasn't an alien at all. Underneath its exoskeleton was a non-anomalous human being. If that was true, then this was even more terrifying than an extraterrestrial visitor. The scientists were sure that the USSR had developed a new kind of organic armor, and this anomaly showing up in Wisconsin was the result of a test on US soil that had gone wrong. If that was the case, then there was no telling how many more of these exoskeletons were out there and would need to be contained. The Foundation had to act quickly and find out more. While SCP-2273 was recovering, they called in Dr. Friedrich, an on-site psychologist who could speak several languages including Russian. Dr. Friedrich would be tasked with interrogating the SCP on his origins and the nature of the suit. The interview was conducted via AM radio from a separate observation chamber, as the biological transmitter seemed to be SCP-2273's only method of communication. The interview began with Dr. Friedrich speaking to SCP-2273 in Russian, only for 2273 to respond that Dr. Friedrich's accent was atrocious and requesting he use German instead. SCP-2273, who, according to the organic military patches on his body, was named Major Alexei Belitrov, initially resisted being interviewed. He believed that he was a prisoner of war, being held by the American military. According to him, he had been in the middle of battle, and that the Americans had killed his men and left him for dead in the wilderness. Nothing that Dr. Friedrich told him, that there was no war or that the Foundation was not affiliated with the US government, could convince him otherwise, and he refused to talk further. Before a second interview was conducted, Belitrov was given an old copy of the Level 1 Researcher General Debrief as a way of helping him further understand the nature of the Foundation and his containment. Belitrov was more cooperative after that, though the realization that he would most likely be kept in containment for the rest of his life caused him great distress, and he was unwilling to speak to Dr. Friedrich for another 3 days. Dr. Friedrich didn't give up though, and when Belitrov finally opened up to the doctor, he began to tell him more and more. Belitrov told the doctor that when he was a child, Russia was hit by an American nuclear warhead, and that the Soviet Union immediately retaliated. The resulting nuclear conflict, which Belitrov called the War to End the World, caused massive devastation and left most of the planet dangerously irradiated. That is why he had the exoskeleton. It was to shield him from the radiation and allow him to survive above ground. Unfortunately, Belitrov knew very little about how the suit was made or how it worked, saying that it was built by the engineers and that it grew naturally over a period of several years. But Belitrov hadn't made the decision himself. It was his parents who had volunteered him as a test subject for the exoskeleton suit program when he was still young, hoping it would give him a better chance at survival. The process of bonding the exoskeleton to the human body was extremely painful, but according to Belitrov, its advantages far outweighed the pain. The suit not only helped him survive in a nuclear wasteland, but made him a better soldier. The suit allowed him to lift and carry up to 1,200 kilograms, gave him stereoscopic vision, and the organic radio transmitter allowed him to communicate with other soldiers across long distances, as well as listen in on encrypted enemy transmissions. The wounds on his shoulders and arms, where it looked like appendages had been ripped out, were where his weapons and supply packs had previously been mounted. Belitrov had been stationed with his men in the area he was discovered when they were attacked by American soldiers. The soldiers had ripped off Belitrov's weapons and supply pack, and did the same to all his men as well. They were all shot, with Belitrov being spared for the moment only because the Americans had identified him as the commanding officer. Suddenly, there was a bright flash of light, and the American soldiers vanished. Not only that, but the landscape changed. Where there had been a post-nuclear wasteland before, now there were lush green trees. Injured and disoriented, Belitrov began sending distress signals, only to have those signals intercepted by the SCP Foundation. The most interesting part of Belitrov's story, as far as the Foundation was concerned, came during his fourth interview, when Dr. Friedrich asked him about the engineers who had designed the exoskeleton suit. In Belitrov's own words, "They weren't truly known to man until the years of the Great War and the Revolution. The French found them in buried cities where the Western Allies were digging their trenches. Eventually, they were made to build weapons for the war by both sides." By his description, these engineers didn't sound human, but they were by no means unknown to the SCP Foundation. Belitrov described the engineers as humanoid, nocturnal, covered in fur, and possessing technology and intelligence far beyond that of any human. Those familiar with the Foundation's history might already know the engineers by their Foundation designation of SCP-1000, or their more commonly known name, Bigfoot. A quick rundown. SCP-1000 are a species of intelligent humanoid primates that lived alongside humanity in highly advanced cities until their own technology was turned against them. Not only were their cities wiped off the face of the earth, but 70% of their population was slaughtered, and the survivors were driven mad to the point that their mental faculties were no higher than those of a chimpanzee or gorilla. The SCP Foundation is tasked with keeping them away from human contact, in fear of what the creatures would be able to do to humanity if they ever regained their memories and full mental function, and rumors have been spread about them possessing deadly anomalous properties. But evidently, the destruction of the SCP-1000 species never occurred in Belitrov's universe, or if it did, it wasn't nearly as complete. In that timeline, humanity regained contact with SCP-1000 after discovering their underground cities sometime during World War I. After this discovery, both Allied and Axis powers began recruiting them to build weapons, and their weapons played a role in both the Russian Revolution and the Second World War. It was because of these technological advantages that the Cold War escalated into what would become the war to end all wars. Both sides were armed with not only nuclear warheads, but highly advanced radiation-proof exoskeleton armor that allowed the conflict to continue even after the total destruction of the planet. While the humans fought above ground, life continued as normal for SCP-1000 in their underground cities. As Belitrov noted, they never wore the armor themselves, as they had no need to venture above ground. "Only soldiers wear armor, and this is not their war." Belitrov continued to adjust to life in containment and sitting for regular interviews with Dr. Friedrich. He was given the rations provided for humanoid anomalies, but in much larger quantities, as the suit required him to eat around 8,000 calories a day to keep it functioning. Belitrov also began taking advantage of his ability to access the Foundation's library. He would often read or listen to classical music, particularly by the Russian composer Tchaikovsky. He seemed especially fond of reading The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. No surprise, given he was able to directly relate to the experience of living through an apocalypse and being transported to a strange timeline with no way to return home. But with little else to occupy his time, Belitrov began to display symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, reporting in his now regular interviews with Dr. Friedrich that he was constantly reliving memories of the battles he'd fought and the lives he had taken in combat. The suit was making the problems worse too, it seemed. It was as if he could never forget, as one of its features was an ability to store and replay memories. This feature was intended as a strategic aid that would allow commanding officers to more effectively gather and process information about their surroundings. But outside of combat, this only served to force Belitrov into reliving his most painful memories again and again. Every night as he tried to sleep, he would see the faces of his men, their weapons torn from their exoskeletons, laying in the dirt after being gunned down by the enemy. Like many veterans, Belitrov was being hit all at once with the harsh realities of war. Now that his brain wasn't solely focused on keeping him alive, it had time to process all the horrors he'd experienced. He told Dr. Friedrich, "I trained alongside these men for years before they put us back on the surface. Since we were all young children, we were brothers, and I gave them the order to surrender and got them killed. I should have died with them." While the story of SCP-2273 ends here, the story of Alexei Belitrov, SCP-2273-1 continues. In 2018, Belitrov was allowed passage to Volgograd, Russia, as part of an anomaly reintegration program. While he was unable to secure employment within the Russian government as he had hoped, he eventually was taken in by a monastery and continued to write letters to Dr. Friedrich until Friedrich's eventual death from lymphoma-related complications. There's plenty more on the monastery, the anomaly reintegration program, and what happened to Major Belitrov when he returned to Russia, but that will have to be a story for another day. But if you're hungry for more SCP content right now, go check out our series on SCP-5000 The Suit, or the two-part saga of what happened at Site-13. Goodbye for now, my friends.